Hello. A very good morning to everyone out here for the 9th Z Jaipur Literature Festival here at Fort Samvad. Some basic announcements to begin the day with. Please do not leave your bags unattended as the festival is unable to take responsibility for any loss. Please ensure your phones are placed on silent, and should you need to take an urgent call, please do it outside the venue. We would be grateful if you give up your seats for those who may not be able to stand. No flash photography. There are water filters kept across the venue. Please keep the aisles free. Please tweet us using hashtag ZJLF or tag at ZJaipur Literature Fest. In an emergency, please evacuate the venue through the closest exit. Your exit is X. Let's welcome our speakers for our first session. Are we treating our planet right? Suman Sahai in conversation with Stephen Alter.
Should we start? I think good morning and good that you're here. We will talk about what we are doing with our planet, and I would like very much that we have this as an interactive kind of thing. So, if you have suggestions of how we can do it better or examples of how it's been really bad, then we'll interact in between, and then you can have your say. So, think about things you want to contribute to this session, because it's not just about us talking at you, it's us talking together. Now, I would start this by inviting Stephen Alter to give us a flavor of what is happening with our planet, and he's got some pictures which he would like you to see. So, may I invite you, Steve, to show us your visual.
Thank you very much. I'll just stand up because then I can see that. We can start the first slide, please. I'll be giving you a very, very personal take on some of the questions that I hope we can broaden out and discuss in more detail in a little while. I'm coming at this as a writer who focuses on nature. Many of the books that I write are travel memoirs that take me to different parts of India, and where I confront, where I explore, where I try to understand and retell the stories of the natural world. And so that's really where I'm coming from. So I'm going to be giving you a few thoughts very personally from my own experience, and talking about two of my recent books that deal with these issues. I started with this quote, partly because it's not a quote that we would necessarily expect from an author named Jim Corbett, though he, of course, was a naturalist as well as a hunter. But it's a quote that has always interested me, the idea that the book of nature is something that we go back to continually through our lives, and at different points in our lives we learn new aspects of nature. I think Margaret Atwood talked about how we're all rewriting our own story continually. I think the story of nature is one that we continually rewrite. Next, please. Corbett, of course, is best known as a naturalist, a wildlife expert, a hunter, and the wildlife of India is something that has always inspired me. Next, please. These wonderful animals that many of you, I'm sure, have seen in wildlife parks in different parts of this country, they are truly inspiring as a species. Next, please. I wrote a short book that I talked about yesterday, and I won't take a lot of time on that, called The Secret Sanctuary, which is it's for younger readers, and the idea is how we explore that natural world and discover the stories that are there. Next, please. And it deals with a wildlife preserve in Mussoorie, which is my hometown, a small hill station north of Delhi. And there's a wildlife preserve there called the Jabbercate Nature Reserve. And it's the first privately owned wildlife preserve in Uttarakhand. And it's a wonderful opportunity for a person who owns a private patch of land to turn it into a sanctuary where people can enjoy the wildlife there. And one of the things there is we set up a number of camera traps where the animals take their own photographs. So this is a photograph of an eagle that has just flown off from one of the water holes and taken its own picture. There are no people there. It took its own photograph with this, there's an infrared trigger, and as it flew across that, it took its own picture. Next, please. This is a Himalayan black bear. Again, there were no people there. This camera recorded it, the bear recorded its own presence in that particular spot. And next, please. Here, of course, is a leopard, which is also a common species, the largest of the predators in the Jabbergate Nature Reserve. So all of these species, of course, are very dramatic. They're very exciting animals to write about. They're very exciting animals to see. And they become certainly part of the stories that we tell. Next, please. However, for me, one of the things that interests me most is our own place in nature. Where do we as human beings fit into this wonderful diversity, as well as this remarkable unity that we call nature? And our own presence there, I think, is a very important part of the story. Next, please. As a nature writer, I focus primarily on the Himalayas, which is my home, an area that I know. And I often talk about when I'm writing, I write with my feet. The writing process, the first draft of every book, for me is often a journey. And metaphorically, I suppose there's a blank page there. Where do those footsteps lead? Where do they take me? And do I leave footsteps? What else do I leave behind? I wish I could be there when that camera goes off and the animal takes its own picture, because I would be invisible in that thing. And yet, at the same time, I'm very much a part of this landscape. Next, please. Throughout the journeys that I take, there are so many things in nature that inspire me. There are so many remarkable images that you come away with. This is a blue poppy, one of the most beautiful flowers in the Himalaya. This was taken in Tibet. The color is just so incredible. Next, please. Butterflies. This is a common leopard butterfly. The intensity of those colors inspires us. Next, please. Plum-headed parakeet in the deodar branch just outside our home. You cannot look at a bird like that without wondering who mixed those colors up. Where did it come from? Next, please. A red fox. This is directly below my office in Mussoorie. On a monsoon morning, she happened to go by, and I was able to get a photograph of her. Next, please. Next, please. This is blue sheep, bharal, in the mountains of Uttarakhand, a species that is so thoroughly designed for those mountains, so thoroughly able to climb those peaks that we as human beings aren't really designed to take on. And also so beautifully camouflaged there. Next, please. Here is one of my favorite Himalayan animals, a mouse hare or a pika. What I love about this photograph is that it took me almost an hour to get this photograph, because the pika was hiding in amongst the rocks, and he was very shy and didn't want to come out, and I had to sit very still there. And that process of sitting still was a meditative process for me, as I waited for him to finally come out and allow himself to be photographed. And what is so dramatic about a creature like this is that it is so much a part of that landscape, so much a part of those rocks. The coloring in its fur is almost mineral pigments there. And you get a sense that this whole mountain isn't just the mountain that we see from a distance, but as you get closer, these are the creatures that are there. And we ourselves are part of that environment. We ourselves are part of that life that exists on the mountain. Next, please. The book that perhaps brought this into focus for me more than anything is Becoming a Mountain, which is a book that I wrote and published just a few months ago. And it describes a series of journeys through the Himalayas. The title, I mention this here because it is an effort. It comes from a title of a chapter in a book by Aldo Leopold, one of America's great nature writers and conservationists, in which he talks about the need to think like a mountain. And that became a slogan for many conservationists in the United States, the idea that if we are to preserve this environment, if we are to engage with the landscape in a constructive, protective, sensitive manner, we have to learn to think like a mountain. In my book, I perhaps took one step back or one step forward and trying to become the mountain itself. The Buddha has written that if you are to travel on the way, you must become the way itself. And that certainly for me is a message that I carry with me in these journeys. Next, please. Next, please. Yes. I have to explain. I talk about spiritualism, sacred and the sublime in these journeys, and yet as an atheist, I don't necessarily subscribe to any particular faith. And yet, at the same time, the gestures like this one, this cairn that is built on the Quarry Pass in Uttarakhand, those gestures fascinate me. I understand the significance of those gestures, where they're coming from. An effort by human beings to look at those mountains and then bring them into our own scale of reference, bring it down to our level, and understand that we are also a part of this enormity that are the Himalayas. Next, please. Those gestures are gestures that often are outside of any religious architecture, whether it's a temple, a mosque, or a church. There's a certain reverence for the rocks themselves. This is a rock on the parikrama of Kailash in Tibet, which has simply been daubed with oil and someone has put a scarf around it. Those are gestures that I think show a true reverence, a humility in the face of nature, and also a message of conservation. Next, please. I'm showing you pretty pictures, and it's important to see pretty pictures, but to me there is also the sense of how we as human beings interact with that landscape, and in many cases where the camera frame ends, there is destruction, there is pollution, there are so many other things that are there. And I think it is our responsibility to look beyond the frame of the camera. And yet, at the heart of it, this is what inspires it. This is what should drive us to protect our environment, is this tremendous elevation, the enormity of the Himalayas that's there in front of us. Next, please. These are Brahmkamal flowers at an altitude of about 13,000 feet in Uttarakhand. Again, an untouched landscape. And yet here, this is Taksang in Bhutan, here is an effort by human beings to take that landscape and alter it, to change it, to build this monastery there. And yet, in this instance, I like to think that there is a connection with the landscape. The landscape itself was not necessarily destroyed, but human beings somehow adapted it with a reverence and a sensitivity. Next, please. This is my own garden, my wife's garden in Missouri, and we take nature in many ways and we alter it, we change it, we adapt it. These flowers are not native to that part of the Himalayas. These are hybrids. I don't think they're genetically modified. No. But at the same time, we engage with that environment in many different ways. And we create beautiful things in that process, just as we often destroy what is there. Next, please. Next, please. Very quickly, the three mountains that I visit during the course of the journeys in becoming a mountain are three mountains that have a number of stories attached to them. I approach a mountain called Nanda Devi, which is on the extreme left here. This is looking very from a ridge very close to my home in Garhwal, looking across at Nanda Devi, and the peaks that guard her sanctuary, and then Trishul, which is the mountain to the right there. Many stories attached to it. Next, please. Nanda Devi has stories of adventure and climbing, tragedy on the mountain, but it also has an enormous amount of mythology attached to it. Nanda Devi is the iconic goddess of Uttarakhand, and her stories, her mythology is embedded in that landscape. And as we tell those stories, we give, in a sense, greater significance to that landscape. We try to understand it, interpret it, and in many cases preserve it as well. Next, please. And yet at the same time, there is much of the tragedy of human experience is also embedded. This is a lake called Rupkund, very close to Nanda Devi, where a number of pilgrims perished years ago, and their skeletons are still found there. So there is a human presence in these places, even though they are very remote. And as a writer, as a traveler, as a storyteller, I am compelled to find those stories, tell them, and tell them within the context of that larger landscape. Next, please. Mount Kailash, I mentioned earlier, is the iconic peak in Tibet, which again I traveled to, and it's a spectacular mountain in that way. And yet, as you walk around this mountain, the parikrama of that peak, the amount of trash, the amount of refuse that has been left behind by pilgrims is truly disturbing. Next, please. Kailash, again, is full of stories. The striations on there, which are actually caused by erosion, are, in fact, in much mythology, they're described as the ropes that Ravan, the demon king, tied around the mountain as he tried to lift the mountain and carry it off to Lanka. Next, please. Here is the north face of Kailash. You see the cornice at the top. This is often described as the hood of the Sheshanag, the cobra that sits and protects Lord Shiv in his meditation. These stories, this mythology, which the Himalayas are so full of and so rich with, I think give this landscape greater significance for us as human beings. Just as when we look at the night sky and someone tells us these are the constellations and the Great Bear and the Great Dipper, suddenly the night sky takes on a whole different meaning. And it's similar with these sort of myths. Next, please. Very quickly, this is along the route of the parikrama around Kailash at about 19,000 feet. Very desolate. Next, please. And as you cross the pass, here is another human gesture. You cannot even see a rock for the prayer flags that are draped up at about 19,000 feet. And these prayer flags, in a sense, those gestures are trying, I'd like to think, to recreate those colors of the blue poppy, the other colors of nature in some way. There's an enormous amount of trash up there, but there is beauty in some of these gestures, and we have to recognize that. Next, please. Here's just an example of some of the mysteries of this. Why this billiards table is there at the north side of Kailash, I have no idea, but as you can see, it's been filled up with trash, and it gives you some sense of the human presence there. Next, please. Very quickly, Bandarpunch, another mountain that I attempted to climb in the course of this book. It's the iconic peak right behind Mussoorie, a peak that is close to human habitation, as you see here. Next, please. And in the course of climbing that mountain, I think I became aware more than anything of how small we are in the face of these mountains. This is a puja that is being held by some of the Sherpas who are accompanying me at our base camp. Next, please. And another cairn that they constructed there, which again reconstructs the mountain. And I think in much of what we do in terms of our storytelling and our encounters with nature, it's an effort to bring it down to a human scale, to bring it to a manageable scale that we can understand and comprehend, because it is so enormous. Next, please. Climbing itself is, of course, a physical process, but I found for myself it was also a very emotional experience. I was absolutely terrified, and I thought this is the silliest thing I have ever done in my life. And yet, at the same time, it was very moving and powerful. Next. And as I say, when you're in those mountains, you confront your own insignificance, in a sense, faced with the elevation, the magnitude of these mountains. And you see the forces of nature that thrust these mountains up with the tectonic plates that were slammed together and then over millennia have risen up, and you can see those forms in the rocks. Last slide, please. Thanks. This, again, is Mandapunch, a final iconic shot. And again, as I say, I'm showing you pretty pictures. These are to inspire you. We all know what lies in the foreground. We all know what goes there. And I hope that we can, the short answer to the question, I think, in our discussion is no, we are not treating our planet right. But at the same time, hopefully, this is the kind of thing that inspires us. So thank you. I talked a little bit more than...
Yeah. Thank you so much, Steve. I can't imagine a better start to this session than these pictures, which are uplifting and which should inspire us to do a little bit more for our planet than we are doing right now. But let me pick up the thread of those beautiful animals that you showed. And we all like to go to nature reserves and to zoos and do kuchiku with the animals, and we all like nice animals. But let me show you one more aspect of what happens when animals and human beings interface. One of the problems, very particularly in Uttarakhand, from where you've seen these pictures, and in other places, is the human-animal conflict, which means the place not where humans are dirtying the nature, but where humans and animals genuinely have a conflict of interest. And how does that happen? One of our responses to saving our wildlife, our nature, has been to pass a number of laws. Are you aware that there is a Wildlife Protection Act? How many of you are aware that we have a law in this country which is called the Wildlife Protection Act, under which you can't kill any animals other than domesticated animals for food, but wild animals you cannot kill. Now, what happens when you mindlessly implement a law like that? Your beautiful nature, your beautiful animals, for example, the wild boar, the nilgai, now increasingly the monkey, have come into conflict with farmers whose crops they are destroying. So, you will have many regions in Uttarakhand, from where you have seen these pictures, where farmers have stopped farming because the wild boar comes at night, digs up the whole field, eats up all the potatoes, eats up all the new peas that have been planted, and goes home. Now, the farmer is devastated. Similarly, in other parts, in the Tarai area, you have the nilgai. Do you know what a nilgai is? What is it? What is a nilgai? What is it? A nilgai is not a cow. It's an antelope. There are two deer families, one are deer, the other are antelopes. So, a nilgai is an antelope. Now, it comes under the Wildlife Protection Act, and now there are hordes of nilgai who go and stamp down fields and destroy the crops. You can't do anything to them because they are under the Wildlife Protection Act. Why does this come into conflict with the laws of nature? In nature, nature itself regulates the population almost of wildlife, right? Leopards will eat deer, the deer will eat vegetation, keep the forest sort of clean, the proportions between different plants, different ecosystems in order. So there is a balance in nature which we tend to destroy either by polluting nature, overkilling animals, or by not killing them at all. The process of retaining a balance in nature is called culling. And many countries in the world, in Europe for example, they will, where they also have deer and antelope etc., but they will open a hunting season with a limit so that the population remains healthy, it is in balance with what food is available in the forest, and it does not become a pest, it does not become vermin. I wanted to bring this to your attention because as much as we all love wildlife, we also have to become conscious of a problem that has developed by, I would say, a law that went out with good intentions to protect animals, but because it has sort of worked against the laws of nature in a particular way, you are having an overpopulation of animals that are coming into conflict with human beings. This results of course in poaching, in slyly killing animals. You could end up killing a mother who has just got little babies, you could end up killing the babies, whereas the laws of culling, the policies about culling wildlife are very well established. So I'd like you to think about this, I'd like you also to reflect on this, because our efforts to save the wildlife and to conserve the wildlife is actually in some instances, in some cases, taking away the livelihoods of farmers. And this is a situation which teaches us one thing. I think it teaches us mostly about the laws of balance in nature. The fact that everything in nature is in equilibrium, everything finds its place. The moment you start to over destroy or to over protect, you get into trouble. So think about where this human animal conflict is going. Sure, of course you can interact.
The thing is this, it's true, the conflict, animal-man conflict is there, but at the same time, the encroachment that humans are making on their areas.
Of course.
Now you see, in the urban areas, where there used to be some jungle nearby or something, now those have been destroyed and human settlements have been done there. So you are including large areas of the wild cats like tigers or leopards or some other animals,
Sure.
and they sometimes come to these villages or urban towns and they kill people also. So balancing, you are right, but then we humans should also balance and should not disturb their habitats.
Absolutely.
Don't you think so? And
That is why the Wildlife Protection Act came, because we were getting into their areas
it's true.
and destroying their habitat.
it's
No, you're
true.
completely correct. You're completely correct. But moving away from wildlife, are we treating our planet right? Are we doing for our planet what is right for our future and for the future of the planet? Can we get some responses? Can we get some ideas? Can we get some comments before we take this further?
Hello. Yeah. Actually, very interesting about the culling of the animals. But what, as you were speaking, I was just reflecting on it, and I was thinking that the farmers, from generations, they have a way of protecting their crops. Now there are three kinds of people who are at play over here. One person is a destructor, who is actually encroaching or creating problems, and maybe creating buildings and taking over forests and deforestation and water. And the poachers, I put them into one bracket. Then there are the lawmakers. They are a second group of people. And I think the farmers are the real conservationists. They are the ones who are most connected. The people in the hills are the most connected to nature. They have been living over there and they have their own set of rules. I think the problem is arising when a third party is coming and making a rule which is such a blanket rule, saying is, okay, now this is going to happen all across, not taking into account that the farmers from those, they are more connected to nature than us, than you and me actually. And they have their own rules. We kind of diss that out and we put our own.
I think part of the
Overall
problem
things.
is that, I mean, if you were able to leave solutions to be found by people who are to deal with these problems, you might get a better fit. I think that, but Stephen, moving away from the nature, wildlife, the conflict, the conservation, the exploitation, the poaching, that whole angle, we are looking at a planet which is losing its moorings on all sides. Forests and biodiversity and animals is one aspect, but what about our water? What about our air? What about the way we are extracting minerals? What about the way that we are using oil? What about the way that we are using energy? We are consuming far in excess of what this planet can afford to give us. I mean, you're from MIT, and if you recall, there was a group at the MIT in the 70s that talked about planetary boundaries. The Limits to Growth was this book that that came out of that effort, saying that growth cannot be limitless. You cannot just go on and on building more and putting up more factories and producing more products and driving more cars. That whole limits to growth and planetary boundaries thing is coming back into focus. What have you been following on looking at the planet, its boundaries, and how we are crossing those boundaries? And being a mountain man, being also somebody who has experience of university life, what from your own personal experience do you see?
I think that I'm glad you mentioned the limits of growth, because I've always felt that this is one of the great fallacies that we've been operating under for a couple of centuries at least, is the idea that we can somehow keep growing and growing and growing. And I think that's just foolish. We grow as a population. Of course, there's greater demand and all of that, but I think that the economic model that somehow more growth will create more prosperity, will create more growth, is I think more and more we're understanding that it's nonsense. What I'd do is I'd take examples from nature. We were talking just yesterday about where are the solutions for these problems, and I certainly don't have the solutions, or all of the solutions, or even a handful of solutions to give you, but I do think it's important for us to be able to look to nature itself for some of the answers. And Delhi, of course, has just gone through this experiment in the odd even numbers, reducing the number of vehicles on the road. Well, nature does this all the time. The tides in the ocean is never always full. There are times when it empties out. There are rivers, if you go to any of the rivers in Uttarakhand, in the evening it's higher, in the morning it's lower because of the glacial melt. And so in a sense, I think we have to realize that instead of always having our petrol tank full or our glass full or whatever it is, there's no harm in saying, today I'll leave it empty, right? So I think in a sense we can see those models in nature and somehow replicate them both as a philosophy but also as a practice in that way. And we say to ourselves, I don't need a new car every 10 years, maybe I need a new car every 15 years. And I certainly don't need a new car every 2 years in that way. So controlling our own consumption, I think, is vital to it. And nature teaches us that.
Do you think that we really are prepared to control our consumption? Because I think that's where Steve left the most key part of this problem that we have created and that we are facing. Do you think that you are willing to cut back on your use of electricity, on your use of mobile technology, on your laptops, all of which are energy consuming? And how is your energy being produced? Mostly by coal. What does coal do? When you make a coal power plant, you pollute the atmosphere. When you pollute the atmosphere, you have bad air. When you have bad air, the children and you are breathing that air, getting lung diseases, getting asthmas. So you are already suffering from the pollution that we are creating. Does this knowledge or does this realization strike you that you are already suffering? Your health and the health of your family, the health of the children in your family is already suffering because of the pollution that we are creating. Did you ever think like that?
I want to comment on this. Just now, I've heard about Delhi's odd and even everything. You see, I'm from Delhi, and in Delhi, every fourth person, maybe third person, is suffering, as you say, from lung disease or something. In spite of this, the attitude is this, that many of my friends to whom I talk are agitating against it. They say this is nonsense. Why this odd and even? And I can tell you that those 15 days, my own personal experience, not the media, it was so good. At least there were no traffic jams, and there were lesser emissions due to less cars coming on. It may be 10-20% difference, but it made a difference.
Sure.
But I wonder why people don't care for their health, as you say. They need to care for their health themselves, not by somebody.
I can see some kids sitting here. I would like to hear from you. This is going to be your future. Do you think about it? Here's pass in the back and then pass in the front.
Hand at the back there.
You've got the mic. Yeah, go ahead. Whoever's got the mic.
We live in a world that is they just live economically. It doesn't matter. I mean, there's a handful of us that are conscious and we care and we'll do all we can, but the majority of the world is going to stay economically focused and we can't do anything about that. So I think to make a difference, we have to do something that people will see as beneficial in other ways than just environmental, because that will never grab enough people completely. You need to find something that can entice people as well as be environmentally helpful. Otherwise, we won't get enough people to do something.
So does your own health not matter? Is somebody in the back, one of the younger people there?
Hello. Let's say I'm a tiger and
Let's say
now
you're a tiger.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And I see the people are now overgrown in their numbers. So why don't I have a hunting season for myself? But since I cannot do this, I want people, let them assume that if we all are tigers and have to think like the tigers, then we should not overgrow in numbers and do not concentrate ourselves in such areas where there are livelihoods of tigers. So my thinking is that we should be aware about these wildlife and do not concentrate our human population in such areas and spread among all the areas and the law which we are talking about. Instead of just making law that we should not kill these wildlife, we should have some laws that focus on not overgoing the numbers, human population in such areas, and that can be, I think, much beneficial.
Sure. There's a lady in the back there. Give her a chance.
Just to answer your question, as you know, you said, does it not strike you? Do you not understand what you're doing to yourself? I think the problem with us is something that's killing us slowly. We kind of don't care. I think
You don't
the
care?
generation. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's a generational problem. I'm
Yeah.
saying it's wrong.
No,
But
I'm not talking about right or
As-
wrong.
When it's terrorism and you see people die right in front of you, you start caring because, oh my God, it's instant and it's here and it's now. I don't think we appreciate the magnitude of slow death and that we are killing ourselves because we can't see it right now. We can't see it killing people. We can't see people dropping dead right in front of us. And I think that kind of an ignorance is what is making us so, unaware and
How many of
That's the
you
problem.
agree with that? Let me ask the younger generation. How many of you think that this is one of the problems? Stick your hand up.
But I think that one of the things that I think this demonstrates, and your comment demonstrates, is that we have to come, whether we're writers, whether we're communicators, whatever it may be, we have to come up with compelling ways in which we tell the stories, as you were saying, and we have to come up with compelling language for that. By using a phrase like killing us slowly, which is a very evocative phrase, it's a phrase that I think makes sense to everyone here, we can get that message out. And I think for all of us, we're at a literary festival and we're here to tell stories. And I think the effort has to be to take those issues, which some people may find boring or overdone. You know, we've heard about climate change now for quite a few years. It's still an enormous problem. But how do we continue to keep that on the front page rather than having it pushed back to the back pages of a newspaper? We have to come up with phrases, stories like that, that will keep people engaged. And hopefully, as the more of those stories are there, and I think with climate change, more and more, it is being universally accepted that this is one of the most important problems that we face right now.
Do you think that climate change can be something that the young people can engage with? I mean, I'm asking this because you're here and we want you to be part of this conversation. But in your experience,
You're asking an old man, so I think that's...
no, but you
No,
live in an
I
area
think
where you
that the,
deal a lot with
yeah,
people who deal
yeah.
with the
Of
environment,
course,
who
of
deal
course,
with the
of
forest,
course.
who deal with the mountains.
Yeah.
What is your feedback from them?
No, I think that my sense is that it has to be brought onto the front burner, which isn't perhaps the best metaphor to use, but it has to be there in the curriculum, and so that whether we're studying biology, whether we're studying history, whether we're studying literature, somehow that message has to inform what is being taught in the classroom. And then it has to be done in a compelling way so that all of you that are in school aren't going to yawn. You're going to sit up straight and pay attention to it in that way.
You know, you're a storyteller, and you know how to communicate, especially, I suppose, with the kind of books and pictures that you have. Do you think this can be done?
I think it's already being done to a certain extent with climate change. There are other issues that I think perhaps have excited people's imagination less. I mean, sewage treatment is not an easy thing to write a novel about, but at the same time, it's as big a problem on some levels, locally at least, in India. Climate change, I think, has had some profound books, articles written about it. Gretel Ehrlich, one of America's great nature writers, wrote a book called The Future of Ice, and it's all about Greenland and her visits there. And you read that, you can't, for a moment, doubt the fact that something is happening there.
Which is scary.
I think there was a question, yeah, and then...
Question kind of thing. I just need to discuss something. I have my few points. Till yet, what we discussed, I mean, the gentleman, the sir, he said that the plan about odd even thing in Delhi, and the girl there, she said that things are killing us slowly, and this is ignorant. So, just getting the things, if there are few people who understand the things. I mean, there are few who support odd and even thing in Delhi because it's actually a good thing. But instead of these voices being raised, who are in support of nature, in support of treating our planet right, instead of these voices being raised, the voices which are having negative attitude. I mean, what we are get to know about Delhi, that the people who are against it, we're just hearing their point of views. I mean, simple thing, we used to see the ads of tobacco, and just after a short line with a very fast tone, that tobacco is injurious to health. So the things which are negative are being highlighted. If there are people who have certain concern regarding it, regarding, I mean, I'm very much impressed that there are much among the audiences who are really interested to take concern regarding our planet. So I think these voices should be raised, and this is the solution.
How do
If-
you suggest that can be done?
That is simply awakening of mind. If we know, if I know, I am very much concerned. If he is concerned about, he is supporting odd and even thing in Delhi. So instead of just some voices are raised, okay, jokes are being made against Arvind Kejriwal and much issues are there. So we can stand and we can just say ki, okay, this is correct thing and I support. Okay, mass is there, but the people who are correct, the people who think that okay these things are correct, they are simply shut. And people don't, they generally don't want to come out of their comfort zones. People are like, okay, things are happening, let them happen. I know this is wrong, but instead of raising their voice against it, instead of speaking something, people are simply shut. So this shouldn't be done.
Do you go to college then? Do you go to college?
Yeah.
Are you, with your college friends, prepared to do a little campaign around this?
Yes, and we
Why don't
are,
you do it? How many of you would agree to do something like that in your own colleges?
we used to do, and in fact, I think awakening, people are there who have such things in mind, but people are not ready to take action. They just need something, a push kind of thing to go ahead. And this is required in today's generation.
It's your generation that has to do it.
And we will do it.
Good. Let's give other people a chance.
Yes, at the back, there's one comment there.
Hello, Suman. How are you? She's a neighbor of mine from Delhi. But I'd like to bring to your attention that the problem is larger than this. It is basically relating to a change of lifestyle. And lifestyle in the developed world particularly. And America is in total denial of the fact that climate change is occurring because of vested interests of multinational corporations and so many other people who have a great, huge economic involvement and an interest in keeping the status quo. So in a place like America, if you go to California, you will not find public transportation conveniently placed for the people, even now after so many years when they have the latest equipment of producing mass transportation and so on. The American loves his car, and that is the beginning of the entire, so the lifestyle change has to be mandatory if we have to make any impact on climate change. So it has got to be started from the developed countries, because in the lesser developed countries and undeveloped countries in sub-Saharan Africa or in India or in Asia or in wherever we don't have that, we are aping the West. We are looking to them to follow the same kind of lifestyle, and this is what we have to produce and change the mindset of our generation, that we don't necessarily need 2 cars to be happy or get all the material requirements to make ourselves comfortable and happy, because we can do it in a very simpler way, in a much more functional and eco-friendly way, which is close to nature, and that is what our entire heritage has been for thousands of years, to be close to nature. And we have forgotten nature, and this is where we
The problems
need to.
begin.
Thank you.
It's a little girl there still.
I think there was a question down here, yes.
I don't know if the sir who spoke before me was implying about the global north, global south divide, or that the global north has done more to, damage the planet than the global south, or something like that. But I know that there are 2 opposing arguments on both these sides. So there are people who say that, yeah, they have done the damage, but now the ship is sinking. and we're all in the same boat. So everybody has to contribute equally. And there are also people who say that no, they've done the damage, so they should pay a higher price. And countries like India and China that are still developing, should not be asked to cut down on our resources as much as they should, because they are the ones who caused the damage. So I want to know what you think about this and what side you are on. Thank you.
Well, I hope by now you know which side I'm on. But at the same time, I think that no, what you're talking about in these oppositions, the battles, I hope that sometimes we can rise even beyond those to a solution that is more universal. But I think the very short comment that I'd make here is it's far easier and simpler for someone to deny something than it is to argue against it. That's why the United States has such an idiot running for president named Donald Trump, because he simply says no, 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 and it's very easy to say that. It's much more complicated to make the argument against it. If you're going to persuade people that climate change is something that is happening, is real, you have to bring statistics to the table. You have a whole lot of stuff that has to come. It's far more difficult than to simply stand up there and say, no, it's not right. So I think that is the challenge, and we have to take up that challenge. And I think that, as you say, it's this generation, your generation, that will do that. And I wish you all the best on that.
And since it's your future, I think you need to take your future in your hands. I think we are sort of running out of time.
I think we're running out of time now.
Thank you very much. There is a book on climate change in the bookstore, a big format book. Take a look at it. I'll have them, it's a book that we brought out. I'll have them open up the cellophane cover so you can leaf through the books and see that. It's an India perspective, or it's a global perspective with a lot of India perspective in what is going wrong with climate change, what is happening to our water. Our fish are swimming away to somewhere else because the water temperature and chemistry has changed. What is happening to our mountains, the new diseases that are coming into our mountains because of global warming. Take a look, you might find it interesting. Thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you so much for those wonderful pictures. And thank you, guys. Let your minds go tick-tock and see what you are planning and what you can do in your own areas. Start your little campaigns, and good luck.
We wish to thank you, our speakers, Stephen Alter and Suman Sahai, for this wonderful session, and our sponsors, State Bank of Bikaner and Jaipur. A big thank you. The authors will be available for book signing at the book signing area behind the vendor console. Books are available for sale at the festival bookstore. Please note, festival merchandise is being sold at the festival merchandise store behind Charbagh as well as online. You can buy festival brochures at the front desk. Lastly, please keep the festival venues clean and don't forget to tweet us at #ZJLM. The next session here is Mirror World Cornelia Funk in a conversation with Anushka Ravishankar in the next 10 minutes.
With the setting up of the Bank of Jaipur Limited and the Bank of Bikaner Limited, under the patronage of the erstwhile Jaipur and Bikaner states, and went on to blossom into its present avatar as SBBJ in 1963. 52 years of bank's journey has established indelible imprint on the psyche of the local people as our bank, to such an extent that the word bank in itself is synonymous with SBBJ across the state. State Bank of Bikaner and Jaipur, the premier bank of Rajasthan with Pan India presents. Thank you.
Across boundaries, we believe in bringing the world together through entertainment. Z Entertainment, Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. The world is my family.
हीरे मोती से कब तुलती हैं खुशियाँ, शोहरत तो दिल की कमां, बाजार में कब बिकती हैं खुशियाँ, शोहरत तो दिल की कमां, दिल बड़ा तो तू बड़ा, दिल बड़ा तो तू बड़ा, दिल बड़ा तो तू बड़ा।
अच्छाई की एक अलग चमक होती है। रजनीगंधा सिल्वर पर्ल्स, सिल्वर कोटेड इलायची।
गेम्स, मूवीज और म्यूजिक के 71 लाख 21,302 मिनट, ये सब फिट होता है एक छोटी सी दुनिया में।
Free music, movies and games only on Airtel, the smartphone network. The all-new Ford Endeavour. Designed for any terrain. Engineered for the extraordinary. Our best innovations in our most capable SUV, the all-new Ford Endeavour.
There's this magic about India.
अभी जितनी आज़ादी मिल गई है, जितना ज़्यादा फास्ट जा रहा है इंडिया हमारा, ये कुछ बता नहीं सकते।
There is nothing in this world that you can do. You just need to get yourself out of the bed and start doing it, man.
As we wait for our next session, I would like to thank the festival sponsors for JLF 2016, title partner Z in association with Rajnigandha Silver Pearls, powered by Airtel, our venue partners Google, Ford, Mahindra Humanities Center, Aga Khan Foundation, Dettol Banega Swachh India, official cause of the festival, Amity University, university partner, Dove, Rajasthan Tourism, British Council, The Getty, Glenlivet, Amway, Kotak Mahindra Banking Partner, AU Financiers, NH Health, Healthcare Partner, Jan Mikalski, Coca-Cola Beverage Partner, YPO, WPO, Kingfisher Good Times Partner, Diggy Palace Hotel Venue Partner, Rambagh Palace Hospitality Partner, Inaugural Dinner, Lee Meridian Hospitality Partner, Writers Ball, Clark's Amer Hotel Music Stage Partner, State Bank of Bikaner and Jaipur, Indigo Domestic Airlines Partner, Uber Mobility Partner, Penguin Random House, Nestle, Royal Treasure, Anna Media Partners, Patrika Group, Rare FM, Dainik Bhaskar, DNA and Twitter. We'll soon be starting off with the next session, Mirror World.
Cornelia, just quickly, are you okay with starting off generally about how you started writing and then get into Mirror World?
Absolutely, whatever you would like to talk
Yeah,
about.
okay.
You know, let's play it.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
It's more like a slide, I guess.
So the download is
The
somewhere
mic's
else.
on. The mic's on.
Take to Mirror World. Let's stick to Mirror World. I brought a notebook of the next
No, why
Mirror
don't you
World
start with the, oh, that's great.
So I can show.
I've already warned
Hello?
them that they'll need to.
Dear ladies and gentlemen,
Yes.
welcome to the D Jaipur Literature Festival's fourth Samvad. We are delighted and proud to introduce our next session, Mirror World, with Cornelia Funke in conversation with Anushka Ravishankar. Anushka Ravishankar is a children's author and has written over 30 books of verse, fiction and non-fiction. Her books have been translated into several languages like Italian, Korean, French and German. She is also the co-founder of Duckbill Books. Cornelia Funke, as you all know, is a Los Angeles-based German-born writer of children's fiction. She is the author of The Thief Lord, Dragon Rider, When Santa Fell to Earth, Igraine the Brave, the Ghost Hunter series and the award-winning Inkheart trilogy. Cornelia Funke's latest work is the Mirror World series, with the first two installments published in 2010 and 2013, respectively. And now please let us welcome Anushka Ravishankar and Cornelia Funke.
You want to start, Anushka?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all for coming this morning. And of course, everybody here knows Cornelia Funke. How many of you here have read the Inkheart books? There you go.
I feel very honored.
So before we begin, and we will go on to talk about mainly the Mirror World series, but also other things about Cornelia and her writing and what she's doing now. But before that, I think she would like to talk a little bit about the previous session. How many of you were here for the previous session?
Well,
None of you? It was about climate change. So
right, it was the last session. I arrived early, was about climate change and what it means for you as a generation, much more than for older people like me. So I want to at least connect these two sessions, because talking now about fantasy feels like, oh, well, let's hide away from everything that's going on in the world and go into a very nice and cozy, dangerous but nevertheless comforting fantasy world. And we all know that experience. When I'm asked why I write fantasy, I always say because fantasy is closer to reality than realistic writing. We're all sitting right now on a planet racing around a fiery ball that we call a sun. in a universe containing spinning atoms in this table. So what exactly is reality? So I think with fantasy, what I try is to hold a mirror to our world. And when young writers ask me, Cornelia, how do you build fantasy worlds? I say I feed them with this world, because this world is where all our imagined worlds come from. All our imagination, everything we can come up with is fed by this reality, because it's so complex and magical. And of course, that means that every fantasy world is also connected to global change. And when I went from Ink World into Mirror World, I did that also to have more connection to our world nowadays, because Mirror World is Ink World 500 years later. And what that means is that the world we know is emerging, and that all the decisions we made, that humans are God, and that we from now on create this planet, were made in the 19th century. And they were made in such definite ways that we nowadays have to deal with that choice. That we said we can make this planet better. And, well, let's look at what we've done so far. Maybe we did some things that on the long run may prove that we can get out of the mess we created ourselves, and maybe not. And then we will be just a failed experiment of nature, and it will get rid of us. But that's just to say of what I think fantasy is. Fantasy should be a mirror for this reality.
And I think in many ways you've dealt with these things in the Mirror World series as well. But we'll come to that later. Before that, I'd just like to ask you, Cornelia, about, you started off as an illustrator, right?
Yes.
And then you got into writing. Could you tell us a bit about how that happened?
Yes, it was interesting. I started as an illustrator, and then always got stories that I found so incredibly boring that one night I sat down and said, okay, I'm done. I don't want to draw pictures for these stories anymore. I just write a story that has everything I always wanted to draw. But I'm an illustrator, I'm not a writer. And it took me many, many years. I was already at the very advanced age of 28, just to tell you all. You know, you cannot even imagine to be that old. So I was 28 when I started to write my first story. It took me another 7 years just to give you a feeling of be patient with your lives. Take your choices. Give yourself time to understand who you are. At about the age of 35, very advanced by now, I did understand who I am. But actually, I'm maybe a writer and a storyteller who also likes to illustrate. And now, at the incredibly advanced age of 57, I suddenly realized I missed the illustrating.
That's
so I do that once more, very much. So be ready for life surprising you all the time and telling you things about yourself that you don't know yet.
So how many books did you have to write before you started thinking of yourself as a writer?
I wrote 5 books.
Wow.
And I had to write a really fat one, Dragon Rider, to understand, with writing I can go to places I did not know I can.
Right, and I think that's really important because more and more I see these days that, you know, people before they begin to write, they're already calling themselves writers.
How long did it take you? Did you know immediately?
Very long. No, it took me very long. I used to just say that, you know, I write, but I never called myself a writer until I'd written
I think that's very
books,
important,
you know?
because there's so much pressure on the young generation. You know, they tell you sometimes you have to know at the age of 7 what you're going to be one day. This is ridiculous, because you will change so often during your life, and you should go with the changes, and you should be open for all the personalities hidden inside of you. And so it takes a while.
I know it does. So the first book that you wrote, was it a picture book?
No, actually the first book I wrote was called The Quest for a Dragon, because I've always been obsessed with dragons. And it looked slightly like my first dog, my editor said. And it took me to the Himalayas, where I had never been. So I worked with travel reports and friends who had been there, and it was my first journey in the mind before I started traveling in reality. And that book I later turned into Dragon Rider.
Okay, so it already existed as in another form.
But in a very, I thought, very amateurish form. So many years later, I turned it into Dragon Rider.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. So to get to Mirror World now, which is your latest. How many of you have read the books from the Mirror World series? Reckless. Anyone here who's read Reckless? So I do find that it's not as well known.
No, it's my hidden world. I called it by now because everywhere in the world, maybe not in Germany by now, because in Germany it is quite big by now.
Right.
America, it is only slowly starting, but I say it's my hidden world because my fans were so upset with me when I left Ink World and went into Mirror World.
Okay.
I was majorly, they hated me with a vengeance. What are you doing, Cornelia? This is different. This sounds different. You lost your voice. I had a hero suddenly who's 25.
That's right, yeah.
He's very restless. He's very different from the heroes in Ink World because he's in the 19th century and not in the 14th century. And it took a while, and I still remember that one day I got a message on Facebook. And the reader said, Cornelia, I read Inkheart 7 times. That's how much I love this book. I like Mirror World better.
Oh, wow.
And that
is really
made me feel, okay,
yeah.
some did go through the mirror now, and they do understand what I'm doing. And it took me 8 years. I felt like Sir Edmund Hillary had climbed the Everest when one day I stood in Germany in a theater with 2,000 people. And there were only Mirror Worlders.
Oh, nice.
And it had taken 8 years. You know the feeling as
So
a writer
long.
when
Yeah.
you suddenly feel them coming
Right.
into your world. So yeah.
So it's been around 8 years now.
Yes, I wrote
Yeah.
the 3rd book is published now, and this is
in German.
I brought you in German and also in English now.
Oh,
I went on a big adventure last year doing my own publishing company to
Yes.
publish it in English unrevised because my American editors asked me to change chapter 1 and the ending. And I said no. The readers in America, in India, in Germany, all will read the same story. I will not change a word. And when they wanted me to change it, I decided to publish myself. So I spoke yesterday on Bookmark about it. And it was quite a ride, I tell you. I had to publish within 4 months. I had to learn where to print and how to bind a book and get it on the market. But we managed to do it. And I just signed a contract with an English publisher who hopefully brings it to India, Australia, and New Zealand
that's
now.
wonderful. Can we ask who the publisher is?
Yes, Pushkin Press.
Okay.
And this I brought you. This is my notebook of the 4th book that I'm writing. You see, it will be set in Japan. I wanted to, in this 4th book, because Mirror World travels, in the 1st book from the fairy tales I grew up with, the German fairy tales. In the 2nd book, to the French and English fairy tales. In the 3rd book, to Ukraine and Russia and Kazakhstan. And in the 4th book, I'm going down into Asia. And I feel at the moment like a child who knows nothing about this planet, because I enter your universe of fairy tales and folk tales.
So, Cornelia, since there are many people here who haven't read Reckless, would you like to just tell them a bit about what it is about?
It is about a boy of 12 years old who finds a mirror in his father's office in New York. And his father has disappeared about a year ago. And Jacob goes through the mirror and finds behind it a world that very strongly resembles our world in 1860. But the big difference is in that world that every fairy tale is true and every magic is true. So how does a world work in the 19th century when there is magic and when there are fairy tales? So how, for example, would India look? If all your fairy tales are true, what would have happened to the imperialistic traditions? What would have happened if Albion, as England is called, behind the mirror, would have come here and all your magic worked? So I'm currently exploring it and changing the world behind the mirror accordingly. For example, in America, have the Native Americans being very good at what they do with their magic, so the English troops go back as a swarm of beetles, let's say. So I can change. I, on the one hand, do show the impact of the 19th century, but I can play with it.
Right.
So this is what I'm doing currently. I write every first draft of my books by hand. And all of you who are writers, I can tell you only one thing. never write the first draft of a story or book on a computer. A computer is a fantastic tool to work on the second draft. Do the first one and allow yourself to play. So if you do that, and for example, you have a notebook like this, and I love the big formats, I start by just doing random notes and collecting my thoughts, having images in there, and starting to sketch.
Could you zoom into that, please, so that people can see it more clearly?
So, for example, this page shows, you see, I start drawing, I start gluing photos in. I work with visual material and with sketches. I can only recommend that. Because what I have so far is of Mirror World. I have 40 of these notebooks.
Wow.
And it will show you your own process and how you're putting things together. And what it also gives you, it gives you back the play. Because you will not think about, oh my God, on the computer screen, this all looks so neat and proper already. It's done. It is not done in your first draft because you are still thinking. So what I do is I try to get closer to what I try to understand about a culture or about rules by working with visual material. And you all know how much we are by now influenced by visuals. So I think we have to gain that back. Look at how your books were so intricately illustrated at some point. Now, there is with many publishers the belief that a book shouldn't be illustrated. That's nonsense. That's ridiculous. The image plays with the word. And I'm currently writing a sequel to Ink World, which is called The Color of Revenge, where I will say it's the war of the image against the word and what word and image can do together. So, yeah, that's what it looks like. And the other books are filled already, and I may have to fill a lot more before I'm done and can start writing.
So how many of the books do you plan before you start writing?
Well, I plan at the moment to do a journey around the world, which is very ambitious. I may drop dead before I'm done with that. So the fourth already gets me into awful trouble because you can imagine to come to Asia.
Right.
So you have India, you have China, you have Japan, you have 100 other countries with intricate, beautiful folk story traditions.
And very different cultures.
So I have already an Indian character in the third book. His name is Shetira.
Okay.
And he's a prince who fell in love with a fairy and died for that. And he follows her as a ghost, and he is her coachman. So I have Shetira in some way introducing the Indian culture already while I'm traveling through Russia and Ukraine. But I still don't know what he will do because I think he wants to take revenge.
Right. So I find that, could you just explain a bit about the geography of, like you have France and you have, like you said, Albion is England.
I had to rename every country. And what I did is I looked into 19th century records and found old names.
Right.
So for India, I will use many names of the provinces and of the regions.
Right.
And I looked at many maps, which provinces were occupied by the Brits and which were not. And I will try to follow a little bit your traditions there. Where was the most powerful resistance? Where were the most unique cultures? But of course, this is such a vast country, and in many ways, it's not one country. It's many, as far as I understand. So how do I do justice to it? Japan is easier, although the 5 islands are very different too. But India, I almost feel like it explodes each time I go near.
Yeah. So I really find that really interesting because we get a lot of fantasy, submitted by young people.
Yes.
And I think it's important for people to understand that though you write fantasy, there's a lot of research involved in it.
Yes.
It's not just something that comes out of your head, because you are basing it very strongly in reality and history and culture.
Yes, because fantasy is a very, very dangerous genre. If you write it without doing research, you will just reproduce your own cliches.
Yes, absolutely.
You will reproduce cliches you've seen on a screen, that you read at Tolkien's books, that you read in whatever you loved as fantasy. You will not be able to do something original. So I can only recommend, first of all, set a place and make the place of your story one of its heroes. Because the place will be your canvas on which you paint the story. If you have not prepared the canvas properly, your image will be bad, very bland. Whereas if the canvas feeds your story, it can become so rich. And look at your canvas. Heavens. There are so many places in India where you could set a story, then set a time. So if you say fantasy, what does that mean? Is that Middle Ages? If it's Middle Ages, is it the 14th or the 15th century? If you decide to go there, do research on that time. Understand the clothes, understand the people, understand the fears of the people at that time, the hierarchical structures, the hardship of the farmers, understand what season meant and nature and what it felt like to be in the dark, because that's what the Middle Ages meant. And if you understand that, you can write fantasy. But if you don't, as you say, it is the worst. It will become cliche.
Yeah, it's mostly cliche. You just find derivative things because they've, like you said, it's from what they've already read. So what I'm getting from what you're saying is quite wonderful, that you also do this research and there's a lot of hard work, and then you also play. I think a lot of people don't understand how much you need to just play with ideas and with thoughts and with images.
How do you start? Do you start also with research, or do you?
No, see, I write mostly a lot of picture books and shorter chapter books. So I haven't written a work that needs so much research.
But even for picture books,
but even for that, you just need to. It takes a long time to actually start writing.
It's almost as if we go on a journey. You don't go on a journey without filling your chest.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. So you put all the things in that you may need on the journey. Then, of course, while you're working, for example, on these books, I work about 2 years. There is a time when I have to stop and say, I don't have that tool. I need to go back and research on that. Or the other thing is, many ask me, do you know the ending to your story? I don't want to know the ending of my stories. Yeah. I get so bored if I do. So what I do is, do you ever know the ending?
I don't no.
Right? There are other writers. For example, J.K. Rowling is known for having written the last sentence of Harry Potter, put it into a safe, and she went there. I still think in some ways you do notice that during the book, because sometimes you had to put the story on the leash to get to that sentence, and you feel it. And when she says nowadays, oh, I wish Hermione had ended up with Harry, that is, she didn't allow the story to tell her who ends up with whom. I love to allow the story. It can be utterly confusing, and I think a story is like a maze, like a labyrinth. And the better you get as a writer, the bigger the labyrinth gets. And when you walk in, the story starts doing very cruel things to you. First of all, a story doesn't want to reveal its secrets to you easily. So don't think you walk in and you're the master. You're so not. You're just the pen. So you walk in, and the story starts whispering. So you hear it from everywhere. Camellia, come here. This is where you have to go. Oh, yes. And if you start listening, it will fool you to no end. You will get lost in the hedges. And that's what some people call writer's block, which does not exist. It's just you running into the hedge. So you have to go back. And then they send the wrong characters. And they say, why don't you talk about this character? I'm sure it's a very important one, which is a lie. So right, and you have to really earn to find the heart of the story. But when you do, it's a very exciting thing.
Yeah, that's what's exciting about writing. Because I have met writers, like you said, who write out the whole thing and they have everything planned right to the last minute. And I honestly find that boring.
Yes, and I believe readers are far more clever. Because readers do see your patterns. We all sit in the movie theater and say, oh, here comes. Okay, the crisis of the hero. Here, and now there will be the major solution. ... plot point 1, plot point 2, plot point 3. And I think in a novel, you shouldn't do that. Well, they shouldn't do that in movies either, but that's another thing.
Yeah, so that's where the playing comes, because you're
Yes.
letting the story
Yes.
take you where it will go, but you also have to kind of, it's a nice tension, right?
It is.
Because you have to let it go where it will, but you also have to slowly coax it back into some kind of structure.
Sometimes you almost feel like, because
Yeah.
it gives you so many things,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
The richer a story gets, the more characters you have. I think at the end of Ink Death, I had 128 characters. So you're like, oh God, on which one do I focus? I could follow them all now. So what I try, for example, with 4, I try to, at the moment, get them all into one place again and say, okay, people, we have to do this together. Okay, how can we continue?
Yeah. So another interesting thing I found in Mirror World is that the brothers are called Jacob and Will.
Yes.
So is that after the Grimm brothers?
Yes, it is, of course. It is my playing with Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. It is also, Jacob and Will are both inspired by my son. I have a very wild 21-year-old son. I learned a lot of things about life from my son. And he is the model for both brothers in a way. He has a very silent and very melancholy side and a very wild and reckless side. So I always say to him, you're both of them, and thank you for being a brilliant muse. My son doesn't like to read books, he likes to be in books. So whereas my daughter is my best editor, she's 26 and my first reader.
Okay. So two things that there's a lot of in Mirror World. One is the theme of love is very strong,
Yes.
isn't it? And,
Yes.
and there are a lot of these love triangles happening as well.
Yes, but the interesting thing is I did not know what it is about when I started. And the interesting thing is the most important character of Mirror World hid herself very well in the first book. I'm revising the text of the first book at the moment because I feel I did not do her justice. And her name is Fox. And when a Japanese translator came to me and said, Cornelia, do you know that the fox is the symbol for the woman in Japan?
Oh.
And I said, no, I did not know, but we all know things we do not know. So Fox is a girl who is originally from France, a Lorraine behind the mirror. And she has quite a dark childhood history with a very abusive stepfather. And she one day saved a red fox and her cubs from her brothers. And the fox in return gave her as a gift a fur dress. And since then she can shift shape. And she can be a fox or she can be a woman. It makes her age much faster though, because she's an animal as well. And that character by now has taken over. And she is very much in love with Jacob, my hero. And it's a very tormenous and difficult love, as most loves are. And to see that character rise, and by now in Germany, it's the favorite character of almost all my readers I ever created.
Mine too.
But
she really grows on you in the second book.
And what is interesting as a woman, I think, while I was writing her, I understood so many things about women, because I think women, in very strange ways, are very close to the ground. You know, in old myth, the woman is always the earth, and the man is the sky, which always means the men are a little bit off the earth and in the clouds, right? And it's a very different concept. It's ruling the world or coming from the world, and being part of creation, which in many ways women are. And to have all that in that character, and also to see what love does to her, because I, at my very advanced age, think that women are often obsessed by love. I think women very easily think it's the most important thing in life. I don't think many men do. I think men can be infatuated with love. I think they can be in love with love, but I don't think they make it an absolute priority in life, as still so many women do. It's still our favorite drug. And what that does to women, and how dangerous this can be and how wonderful this can be, I try to especially explore in the third book, which is called The Golden Yarn. And the golden yarn is for me the bond that binds us to people and that we don't understand. It can be two friends, it can be to a lover, but it is almost inseparable. It can strangle us, it can enhance us, it can do many things. So
yeah, the relationship between Jacob and Fox also, the way it grows and the way it changes.
So where do you go
really
when you are also
beautiful.
friends?
Yeah.
Can you become lovers when you've been best friends? All that.
But all your books, I think you have very subversive young little girls and women, don't you? Your
Yes.
picture books and
Yes,
all of them. It's something that you do.
And I think we need to, as
We
women
do,
writers.
absolutely,
You know, at some point, I had written The Thief Lord, which is a book about a gang of homeless children in a movie theater in Venice, Italy. And there's one girl character and 7 boys. So luckily, a reader wrote to me and said, Cornelia, I love The Thief Lord, but why is there only one girl? And I felt very guilty. And I thought, that's what women do. They write about men. Would a man make a female character as the heroine of a book? By now they do. Philip Pullman did in The Golden Compass. He did a glorious heroine. We just all saw the Star Wars movie. There's a glorious female heroine in there now, which is quite new. And there's things that, but I think you have to take the responsibility. And of course, I still have the 2 boys. I still have Jacob and Will.
Yes.
And I've many male characters. I love to write male characters.
There are many male characters, but some are at the end of the books. It's the women who stay with you.
Yes,
the 2
the dog-
fairies, the
the
dark
2
fairy,
fairies.
the red fairy, and Fox, of course.
Yes.
You know, the witch, the one who helps him. Somehow the women
Yes.
stay with you
The
much
weaver
more.
and the weaver. Yes. It's almost like in many fairy tales, when I read Russian fairy tales and Ukrainian fairy tales for my research, I found so many powerful women characters. And I just found an incredible Indian fairy tale where I was so surprised. It is about a king who does not worship Indra in the right ways. So Indra decides to punish him because he worshipped the god of fire. So Indra turns him into a woman. So the king turns into a woman, and he has 100 sons, and he goes to his sons and says, I'm so sorry, Indra turned me into a woman. I was punished. I will go into the wilderness and become a hermit. So he goes into the wilderness, but he meets a hermit and falls in love with a hermit and has another 100 sons. So Indra says, wait, this was not the purpose of my punishment, that you have another 100 sons with somebody else. This is not what was meant to be. So you decide, which 100 sons should I kill? Because I will kill 100. So you can choose. Should I kill the ones you had as a man, or should I kill the ones you had as a woman? And the king, who was turned into a woman, says, oh, please kill the ones I had as a man. And Indra says, why? And he said, because I love them differently as a woman. And I found that to be such an interesting fairy tale, and it surprised me. Because in many Indian fairy tales, there's also a lot of fear of women. And a lot of women, as in our fairy tales, are easily witches. So all the goddesses have disappeared, but the witches are still there.
So you said, we talked about this earlier, about Jacob being 25 years old.
Yes.
So how did that, has that changed your readership? Are older people reading your book now rather than the...
and that took a while, because they first did not understand what I'm doing. So he's 25. What does that mean, he's 25? And there are no children in the books. But what I learned from my readers in the Ink world was their favorite character of all children, even the young ones, is Dustfinger. And Dustfinger is 42. Left his wife, is not a very good father or husband, is a liar and a cheater. Favorite character. I once remember I sat in Vienna and there were all these grown-up journalists and 2 children journalists. And the grown-up journalist said, so who's the favorite character of children in Inkworld? I said, oh, it's Dustfinger. And they said, no, it's such a multi-layered character. Children will for sure not like that. And I said to the children journalists, can you explain? And one of the boys, he was I think 11, said, he makes his own rules. That's why he's my favorite. And the grown-ups, of course, hadn't got that, understood that. There are strange things happening while you grow up. I just give you a warning. So it was very interesting that I learned I can do whatever age I want. When I was a child, I didn't want to read about children. I wanted to read about grown-ups. I wanted to understand the game.
Yeah.
So we are free to do that.
A lot of the fairy tales, for instance, are all
exactly.
about grown-ups. So
and we all don't say, oh, I wish in the Lord of the Rings there were more children. No, we don't. And of course, Harry Potter is a good example how it can work, but it doesn't have to be. I think if she had written about grown-up wizards, it would have been equally successful.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so you are called the J.K. Rowling of Germany. Do you like that?
Yeah, I think it's funny. The funniest was when somebody told me that in Dragon Rider I had used a motive from Harry Potter, where I had written Dragon Rider 10 years earlier.
Yeah.
But I think it's a very big compliment because she is one of the great storytellers of our time.
I think they also mean it in terms of how well known and how popular you are in Germany.
I think
it's meant
we are
like
all the same tribe.
Yeah.
We are the storyteller tribe, and I think it is always a wonderful compliment. Though the greatest compliment I ever received was in India, in Delhi. I was at a festival, and there were many oral storytellers who tell story not from the written word. And when I said, they asked me who I am, and I said Cornelia Funke, and they said, did you write Inkard? And I said, yes. And they all looked at me like, you passed the test. You're a storyteller. That was the greatest compliment I ever received.
Right. So, would you like to show the app? What's the status of the app? Yeah.
Do we have something?
Oh, okay.
Well, they asked me to show something because when I started to write a Mirror World, I had been through the Inkard movie adaptation. And I had actually been through 9 movies in all. So I was not very happy with the movies. I had the feeling for 2 years I'm weaving a flying carpet. And the movies give me back a napkin and say it's the same.
Move the bottle.
So I decided to do a flying carpet. But how do that? And I decided to do it on an iPad. That was the only thing I could afford. I could never have done a movie. And it proved to be the most exciting creative adventure I've ever been on.
So who did the illustrations for this?
It is with a young studio in LA called Mirada. It's owned by 4 Mexicans, which is very rare in LA. And we had a wonderful Chinese illustrator who worked with us on it. And if you do this enough, you go through the mirror.
Oh, wow.
So there you are in Mirror World. And you will find a content of 110 minutes behind it. We call it a breathing book. And we worked with illustration, with movie technology, with shadow play. Let me see what I find. So this is the Ogre Tavern, and you can look around.
Oh, nice.
And you can find stories hidden and notebooks of ogre researchers. And let me find the fairy. And I had a wonderful collaborator on this, Matthew Cullen, who does also crazy things like Katy Perry's Dark Horse music video. So he did this. I had the pleasure of having him as my director, you can imagine. I had a lot of fun with Matt. So you see here, this is, for example, a short story I wrote about a fairy and how you fall in love with a fairy. So you can, let me see where that comes. You see? So you will hear me read the story. And what you can do is The fairies always show in water.
I don't think they can.
And at some point, you will not be able to get rid of her face anymore, because that's all he sees in whatever water he
In
looks
front,
into.
yeah.
It's empty, so empty. Everything seems empty. The days go long.
So let me get out of it again.
The voices of his wife and children seem to come from far away places.
Working with an iPad from above is not that easy. So we go back to the tavern. And I want to show you one that we did with a 19th century technology of a diorama, which thanks to the Getty Research Institute I knew about. It was with lots of layers of paper that they told story. Let me see whether it is. Let me find it. Yes. So this, for example, you can download for free at the iPad store, but sadly, it only works on an iPad because we needed the frame. We're currently working on an app for an iPhone about Dragon Rider. So this one, you can read at your own pace. And Jin Zhang did the incredible illustrations. So you read like this. And it's 12 minutes long. And when you see it from close, you will see it has many layers, which of course in digital format was very easy to do. Some of my publishers are trying to recreate it currently on paper. And the German publisher already published a box with some of the drawings and things that we did for the app. And many fans were upset that I did it for iPad, but it was the only way we didn't compromise the art. And we really wanted to go full distance. We were the only ones to do this, to do breathing books. And what I think is, the wonderful thing is this is loved by book people because it has an intimate feeling that you have when you read a book. It's not like a movie. And it nevertheless works with image because as an illustrator, I'm of course hopelessly in love with image. We also did another thing that it has a great tradition. In fairy tale, we worked with shadow. Let me just find it. We also have recipes for child eating witches in there, which is the favorite of all 8-year-olds. And we had them read by little children. That is, yes. So they always say, Cornelia, is it really cooking recipes? Yes, they are. Oh, there's the fairy. Let me just find. Okay, where am I? I want to try, oh, I know. I have to be on the, sorry, I'm a little, being here on my head, I'm a little disoriented. I need to go back to the counter.
Oh. Okay.
And you see, there are also things like this. There's a map of a part of Mirror World. And there you can just read.
When you're only 12 and don't speak more than a few words.
And it talks about the first years that Jacob was behind a mirror and how he learned to be a treasure hunter. Because that's how he earns his living behind the mirror. He earns his living by finding hidden fairy tale treasure and selling them for a fortune to kings and queens. It's not very responsible, but he's not very responsible.
He's reckless.
Let me find, where do I have, what? The shadow, I look for the shadow play. I'm so sorry, I will show you another, this is the notebook of an ogre journalist, ogre naturalist, who did research on ogres behind Mirror World and was sadly eaten. So you can learn everything of what the ogres behind the mirror look like.
Despite the fact that most ogres
You have to wind up in 5 minutes and answer the question.
Yeah, I think we should stop.
Most casual observers picture them.
So there's many more in there. And what I did with it, many people ask, oh, is this now competition for the book? No, it's not. It's a travel guide for my world.
Right.
So if you want to go to India, you can buy a travel guide, but you still have to go to India. So if you want to go to Mirror World, you can get the travel guide, but you still have to go to Mirror World.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about the book, those of you who haven't read it, is that, like she said, she uses a lot of fairy tales. And for the child eating, which in fact the house is there, you see the house when you go into the Mirror World with the gingerbread house. And it's so nice the way you've woven the fairy tale into the adventure that they're having. So, and these are stories that are additional to that.
They're
right?
additional.
Yeah.
It's almost as if you look into corners of that world that I did not explore in the novels.
So I really think it's a pity that the book has not been read by more. So if it's there in the bookstore, please do get a copy and read the books because they're absolutely fascinating.
Thank you very much.
Now we can have some questions from the audience. We have 10 minutes. Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this conversation. I want to know what sort of books did you read as a child, and have they had an effect on the kind of author you are now?
I read adventure books. I read adventure books and fantasy. So I read a German author called Michael Ende who wrote The Never-Ending Story, and I read Narnia, C.S. Lewis. I was also obsessed with Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. I wanted to live like Huckleberry Finn. And I never read girls' books. You know, I always found the ones where you have wild horses and big adventures. And it's interesting, in Germany I became famous with girls' books because my editor asked me to write a series about a girls' gang. And that's made me, in a way, gave me the freedom to write whatever I wanted to write. But yeah, that's what I wrote.
Okay. Hi. Yeah. Okay, so I grew up reading your books. I read Inkheart, Inkspell, and Inkdeath over 4 days without eating or drinking.
4 days, and I wrote 8 years on these books. You see?
It's okay. I reread them over 4 years. So, yeah, so my dad got very mad at me. I love your work a lot, and I don't know how to tell you that.
Thank you so
my
much.
question is, you mainly wrote for you wrote fantasy books for young adults, which for young adults there's a lot of romance for my generation. There aren't enough fantasy books for the young adults. But how are your books, and how do you think a younger generation or an older generation would take to your books? I mean, what is their response to your books, basically?
Well, the thing is, first of all, I see myself as a storyteller. So I always feel like, yes, I write for children, but the grown-ups are allowed to read the books too. So it's for all ages. With Mirror World, the romance gets much more important because I always say to children, don't go through the mirror before you're 14. And of course, they ignore me and have read it 3 times when they're 10. But I think for them, for example, especially for an 8 or 9-year-old, romance can be incredibly annoying. So I warn them that that may be in there. The older I get, the older, of course, also my books get, because I think about the world in a different way now. So I hope that does register in my books, but I also just wrote a sequel to Dragon Rider, and it was so much fun to go back to a younger audience, you know. That's for 5 onwards, 8 onwards, and I know many grown-ups will love it too, but I love to shift. I also did a picture book just now, and I illustrated it myself.
Nice.
Who picks them?
Yeah, I've read all your books in my childhood. So I look forward to meeting you for a very long time. You're clearly a very tremendous woman.
Thank you so much.
Is there any of your work which you have a particular affection for?
Well, it's always the last book I wrote.
Okay.
You know, I just finished The Griffin's Feather. That's the second part of Dragon Rider, and it's very close to my heart. It took me for a short landing at a Garuda temple in India, although I know you have rarely any Garuda temples, and then on to Indonesia. And it is set there, and that was a wonderful adventure. Thank you.
Hello, ma'am. First of all, thank you for the amazing session. One thing I would like to say is that one reason all of us like fantasy books is that regardless of where they sit and when they sit, they transcend all boundaries of race or religions and nationalities. Anyone can enjoy them, and one thing that makes them that enjoyable are the characters in them. So if you speak, and they can be both human as well as non-human. So in Dragon Rider there was Fire Drake. In Christopher Paolini's Inheritance series, there are numerous dragons with their own personalities and in their in their own styles and when. So what I'd like to ask is, when you set out to write a fantasy book, is there a set template for the kind of characters or protagonists you go for? Because what I've seen is that regardless of, they can be good or bad, they can lie in that moral gray area, but as long as they have their own ambitions and feelings, people tend to relate to them and they drive the adventure for them. So is there a set template you go for in your characters, that they have to be good, they have to be this way, they have to behave a certain way, or they have to have certain predilections in life or something like
I try to not do templates, because I think readers get very tired of templates. But, for example, when I wrote Dragon Rider, I went back to a more iconic characters than I do for Mirror World. In Mirror World, I do them all grey. There are different shades, and I also would say in Mirror World, there is racism, there is, all that, because it should be a reflection of our world. And even now, when I wrote Griffin's Feather, it is endangered species. It is exploitation of this planet, because it has to be. It's set in our world. But I went more for the good, the evil, and the in-between, which I would not do in Mirror World. I have no clear villains. The Dark Fairy in Mirror World, which is by far probably the darkest character, is one of my favorites.
Yeah.
So
Because
thank
she
you.
is also redeemed by her love for the king.
Right?
So,
and I think in reality there are few characters who are really just evil. I think we sometimes in our world do deal with evil. I'm not one of the people who says there is no evil and there is no good. I absolutely believe in good and evil. And I think the moment we say there isn't, we just hide away from a profound darkness that we have to face and that we have to fight. It's just that often evil is defined in definitely the wrong way.
Just wanted to thank you for a great session. I'm a big fan of Inkard, but I do prefer the Mirror World series.
Oh, cool.
More.
Thank you.
No, one thing I've noticed is that the Mirror World series is a lot darker than the Inkard world. And the writing is also a lot more fast and a lot more pacey. Is that a decision you took at the beginning when you started writing, or was it over redrafts?
I think it was redrafts, but it was also Jacob. That hero is so restless and so impatient. He calms down a little bit. I noticed in book 3 that I could go calmer. But it was also that after the Ink World, I wanted to get away from the Baroque and the Middle Age, the Middle Age writing.
Yeah.
And I said, if I'm in the 19th century, it becomes fast.
Faster, yeah.
There's suddenly technology, and human beings stumble over their own feet going to progress. So I thought it has to be in the writing somehow. I think I slowed it down a little bit. As for the darkness, the interesting thing is, Ink World is pretty dark, but I think the characters are not as torn.
No.
I think it's our problem with the modern times. We are so much more torn and not one with the world. And when we feel that, it is very disturbing.
Yes, I think that the conflict in the characters was a lot more realized in Mirror World.
Yes. Well, I got older. I hopefully learned a few things.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. Just coming from around here. Thank you so much for the lovely session. It was excellent. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the language in your books, because you've been translated into quite a number of languages, English and German, and all the way into Japanese. And of course, what language you use really does shape how you tell a story, because there are ideas or phrases that you would use in one language that you don't use in another. And I'm sure if you read the German edition or the English edition, you can see the differences, even though the meaning is the same.
The interesting thing is, for example, the only language I'm fluent enough in to really judge the translation is English. And in English, I work very closely with my cousin, who's my translator. It was very interesting. The translator for the Ink World is Anthea Bell, a wonderful translator from England, but she's 80 years old. And when she wrote Jacob, who's 25, it didn't sound the way I wanted. And so I talked with Anthea and said, would you be okay if this one, my cousin does? who's younger, who's a man, and he may understand Jacob in different ways. Also, he lives in LA like I do, so we could work very closely on the translation. So that was my first lesson, that a book can be completely changed by the translation. And I always get very worried when readers write to me, Cornelia, your Russian translation is a disaster. And then I have to quickly contact a Russian friend to find out this may not be true. So I don't know. But in general, it's a challenge. But I read from my books so often in English that I have to say I love the English translations.
More than the German ones?
It's funny, some passages I say to my translators, I'm very jealous that you could do this in English. And with Reckless, we worked so closely that at some points I said, oh, this is how you translated this? I think I will change this in German too. So it's sometimes played against each other. And the short stories for the app, for example, I wrote in English. And I write more and more short story in English, and they all say I have a different voice. Yeah.
Do you feel that you write better in German than in English, or do you?
The funny thing is, I sound older in English, and it's an interesting theory that all your emotional memory is connected to the language you learned at that age. So as I learned English at about 10, 11, all my childhood before that is not connected to that language, and that may be the reason that it sounds slightly different when I write in it.
Okay, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Would you consider writing a sequel for The Thief's Sword?
I have been thinking about it, and actually I thought about a short story I want to write about Scipio, being a grown-up now and being in Venice, California, and solving a crime. But I still haven't got to the story.
Is it working? Hi, this is Raghav Devjambua, and I didn't read any of your book still now, but the only thing that brought me here was the name Mirror World, but I'll surely go for your world, for your books. It's lovely to hear that you wrote fictional things. I would surely go for it. I like that. But can you tell me one thing that have you ever been through any of the Indian authors or writers, or if yes, then which author have you been through, and what difference have you found between the Indian authors and the English authors?
I have mostly so far read your traditional texts.
Okay.
So I have read a lot of your folk tales, fairy tales, and mythology.
Okay.
And what I find at the moment so interesting is, having lived in a Western world all my life,
Okay.
I feel like a child who
Yeah.
suddenly is on another planet and sees the world suddenly from another direction. And I think that happens more and more with Western artists, because they feel so boxed into the way they have seen the world. And what I especially admire is, and I find that so fascinating in your history, that there's always a spiritual layer
Yeah, there is.
to the way you see the world, which I think the Western world is very
Practical.
much lacking at the moment. Yeah, because they are scared to believe in something after all the things that beliefs took us to such terrible places.
Yeah.
For example, I am German, so I come from a nation where our emotions, our fairy tales, our myth was exploited by fascism.
Yeah, that's
So that for a long time we did not trust our emotions anymore. We didn't trust community, because community stood at the streets and raised their hand.
Yeah, that's
You know, so you haven't had that fascist experience. It harms a nation in many ways.
That's true.
So it's a wonderful thing if you still trust spirituality, and especially in our time where it's so often abused to prove an ideology, or to set men against men. I think spirituality should connect us all.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
I only believe in that kind of spirituality that does see the fellow man and does accept all of us as creatures of this planet.
Okay, that's true. That's really. Thank you.
Hi, I'm a school teacher, and it's a constant struggle when you're trying to get children to write and stick to a certain, you tell them to imagine, and the imagination can go totally wild and off track.
Oh, I did the same. I
Yeah.
always wrote something my teachers didn't ask for.
Yeah. But the thing is, is there some sort of a magic mantra that you can kind of guide Is there any tips you can give? I know that one can go on and on, but is there some sort of, basic tips that you have for me as a teacher as to how one can steer that writing?
Well, first of all, I would always say allow the children to write, to go in their imagination to places you may not have predicted. I would also give them a shorter form, because in a short form you can work in different ways. I would allow children who do not tell story with words to tell story with drawings first, or with collage, or with images. I think it's underestimated how much children think visually. That's why they still understand the symbolism of fairy tale and so easily. I would also start giving them notebooks. I would start saying, this is your book, make it beautiful, make it about you one. I would start saying, what animal are you? What creature? What god? And start telling story from there. I would always go from the symbol and the image, because I think children still understand the world very much like that.
Thank you.
Thank you for the amazing session that I had today. My question to you is that in Ink Deck, what happened to Farid? Did he ever go back to Maggie and Dustfinger, and did he become a famous fire dancer?
He became very famous. And I'm writing the sequel at the moment, and it's 5 years later. Farid is very famous by now. He's breaking hearts of girls in every village he goes. He's not going back to Maggie because, come on, let's be honest, he was never truly in love with her. He was more in love with Dustfinger than with anybody else. And and Maggie is getting engaged with Doria in 5 years later, and Orpheus is plotting his revenge. And that is what it will be about.
So, any more? One last question.
Hi. Cornelia, I really enjoyed the way you said that a story is a maze and it whispers to you, because I'm a writer. Sorry, I'm writing right now. I'm writing my first.
Say you're a writer.
I'm writing my first manuscript, and my story is also similar. It is calling to me, and there are characters behind hedges that are very reluctant, and they are throwing red herrings at me. And while I want to ask you, while you are having breakfast, do you suddenly see a character, Dustfinger or Jacob, sitting in front of you? Oh, I'm doing this right now, Cornelia. Don't you want to know more?
Mostly they stand behind me. I like to do that, so you suddenly feel like, uh-oh, there he is again. And I had it once. I was sitting in my garden fishing leaves out of my pond, and suddenly I felt like Jacob is standing next to me and said, what are you doing? Can you please go back to your desk and finish my story? Or I'm on the phone with a friend, and suddenly I feel them standing there walking impatiently in the writing house like, come on, get back to your task.
So you have your notebook with you and with a pencil in, and you start, oh, okay, I'm here. Yes.
Yes, I will be writing today on the festival. I will be, if you see me somewhere, I will be writing.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
So,
thank you for that.
Thank you very much for this
Thanks, all of
fabulous
you.
session, Cornelia Funke and Anushka Ravishankar.
Well, thank you all. What a wonderful crowd you were.
The
India never
authors
lets
will
me
be
down.
available to
So
sign
much.
their books
Oh,
at the
thank
book
you.
signing area right behind you. Please go directly to this area, not in front of the stage. Books are, of course, available at the bookshop. Please note that we also have a festival merchandise store behind Scharbach as well as online. Festival brochures can be bought at the front desk. Our next session will be with Jerry Pindro about some ways not to write a poem. Thank you.
Thank you.
We request you all not to reserve seats, and if you could just move in the front so the others at the back are all waiting.
The Jaipur Literature Festival is the world's largest free festival of its kind. With daily interactive sessions, lively debate and dialogue, and international music performances every night, it's no wonder the festival attracts nearly 270,000 visitors a year. Since its inception in 2008, JLF has gone international with festivals along the banks of the London Thames and across the pond in Boulder, Colorado. Jaipur Bookmark is an international B2B event for the publishing industry. It runs parallel with the Z Jaipur Literature Festival. Teamwork also promotes the best in Indian theatre through the Mahindra Excellence in Theatre Awards, the only national platform that celebrates all the aspects of the craft from across India. The Going Solo International Theatre Festival is the first of its kind in India, bringing together award-winning single-actor performances from across the globe. While international touring productions such as Bollywood Extravaganza and Bollywood Love Story, a musical, have sold out shows across Europe, Egypt and Russia. Sounds of Freedom, the name says it all. A musical celebration of freedom of expression through workshops and outreach programs, Sounds of Freedom culminates in a live concert broadcast on television and online. The sacred celebrates the spiritual through music, movement, and poetry. Teamwork Arts also produces numerous international festivals. These festivals showcase the best that Indian arts and culture has to offer. Teamwork's major nationwide festival is Delhi Live, a weekend power of imagination. Teamwork Arts, celebrating the arts. For more information, visit www.teamworkarts.com or follow us on Facebook and Twitter.
So it's a big good morning to everyone here for the 9Z Jaipur Literature Festival. We won't waste any time. We have Jerry Pinto for the session, Some Ways Not to Write a Poem. Can we have a big round of applause for him? Thank you so much.
On? Can you hear me at the back? Yeah? Okay. You know, back in the day when this festival was being organized, do you think there's lots of time and you're going to do all this stuff and this cool stuff and you'll do a really thrilling and exciting event, and then days begin to pass and you've got a living to make, and the living has nothing to do with writing, because writing doesn't make you a living, but what writing does is gets you a free ticket to Jaipur and gets you a hotel room from which you can steal shampoo, body lotion, towel, bathrobe, bed sheet, carpet, whatever else, whatever can be moved, you move into your bags. So you bring a separate bag for the stuff from the hotel. You get all that stuff, but you don't get a living. So I should indeed have prepared a full-on, elegant, beautiful presentation with a PowerPoint presentation or a PPT or a Prezi or whatever, and I should be stepping back and saying, as this poem says. But okay, let's actually just make this an interactive session. You got a mic there, kids? Yeah? Don't hide it. Okay? I want to ask you, what do you think a poem is? Big time. We are actually going straight into the bleeding heart of definition. And beware, this is a monster. All definition is a monster. It is willing to swallow you. It is waiting to swallow you. Say for instance, let's look at the most average, ordinary, everyday definition of your life. You are in desperate need of the bathroom. You want to go to the toilet. Now, in most civilized countries, there is an arrangement. There is privacy, there is a curtain, there is a pot, there is a system to take it away and deposit it somewhere where you don't know. In India, this is a problem. There is never a pot. There is never privacy. Women, all the women in this audience, have you ever thought about a world, an India in which every street corner has a clean pot? Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, we are actually obsessive about it because we don't got it. But this, at that moment when you want to go to the toilet, there is a definition in front of you. Men and women, right? So men go into that toilet and they all stand and, you know, it's quite easy. And women go into that toilet and it's not easy. Okay, so there's one side and one side. But these definitions are actually strangleholds that have, in some ways, divided us into two separate coexistent species. And I went to Australia last year, and I do this stuff, okay? I wear kurtas on a regular basis, mainly because a kurta is a forgiving thing. It flows. It flows so elegantly that you might imagine I'm in good shape. Actually, it's there. All well, but it flows. So I wear kurtas as often as I can. And I went to Adelaide and, you know, I was walking to one of my sessions and one sweet bunch of little Australian children were being taken in a crocodile, the way children are generally taken where they don't want to be led. They was taken and one of them said, "Mummy, the bloke's in a dress." So of course the bloke was in a dress. I mean, this is the definition in his head of a dress. But I wear dresses. In India, men wear dresses. If you're a Nirankari, you don't even do this. You have something like that, right? Yeah? And that's like properly a dress. Okay? This could be argued that this is a dress with pants. Okay, go down there, you churidar. What the heck are you doing? Okay, so I'm saying, if you you start by defining what a poem is, the poem slips away. The poem actually evaporates. Now, let's go one step further into that darker heart of what is a good poem and what is a bad poem. And now we are really in monstrously difficult territory. This is because good and bad. Okay, backtrack a little. We are talking English here. English is a language. Like every other language, it comes with a literature, a history, and in a chore pocket, in its inside pant pocket, where no pickpocket can get at it, there's a religion. This religion is Christianity. Yeah? So, when you're in trouble, don't you say, "Geez Louise," yeah, or "Christ on a bike," or "For the love of God," or "bloody." What the bloody hell do you think you're doing? When you say bloody, you are invoking the mother of Jesus, Ibn Maryam, by Our Lady, became bloody. So in the back pocket of every religion, of every language, there is a religion. Remember, 3 languages of the world call themselves languages of the book: Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. Thus, your standard Muslim person, when you come home and say, or Hindu or Christian person or Jewish person, when you come home and say, "I want to get married outside my faith," they will say, "Kitabi to hai na?" Meaning, at least they are people of the book, at least they are descended from Abraham, at least they are descended from Moses. Tell me that much. And the rest of everybody is extra book in the view of the people of the book. Except the people outside the book also think that they are in the book because they have a book. Except that it's not the book in the way that those people define the book. Again, we come up and bump our nose against definition. Again, we come and bump our nose against categories. So good and bad, good poetry and bad poetry in the English language tradition is not just a judgment of aesthetic value. It is also a moral judgment. Baudelaire, okay? Flowers of Evil. Now, that is great poetry. It is fabulous poetry on one side, and if you were reading it to your granny, you would perhaps hesitate about reading the passages in which bulldogs jump and bite at the virginal thighs of women in a dream that Baudelaire is having. You might be surprised. Granny is another category. You're saying this is an old person, she does not have a sexuality anymore, she just wants to talk about God and other such things. You would be surprised. Okay? But our tendency to think in sexuality, so in categories, when the suggested, they said, do something on poetry. So I said, I have written poems, and that is my doing something on poetry. But they said, nah, people don't like to listen to poems. So I said, they want me to talk about poetry, but they don't want to listen to my poems. So they said, yeah. And organizers are like that. They refuse to see any illogicality in their way of looking at the world, but they give you a ticket, they give you a hotel room, and they give you free food as long as you show this, and they shoot a gun at it, and then you can eat that one time and you can't come back for seconds. It's all very bizarre and lovely, and every festival startles you with its own little madnesses. Anyway, so I'm here because I was told don't read poetry, don't read other people's poetry, your favorite poetry, but talk about poetry. The assumption, again, is categories. This is one category where you read your own poems and basically you're being a self-indulgent jackass and you want people to buy your book. Now, I can actually claim with complete faith that I do not want this to happen because the book has sold out. Oh yeah, it's a sell-out book. Okay, let me just add the footnote, which I would hide in the footnotes. It sold out after 12 years. One book wandered out of the bookshop every other week or something. But hey, it sold out. Yeah. So I don't got a book. Then I went to my publisher and I said, do you want to republish? And they said, why? So I said, because, print run. I'll take you outside and beat you up. Babes, you know the pain. What do you think it was? 6 million? It was 1,000. Yeah. But this is one thing, okay, this is one important thing that you will, note, How many of you buy books on the roads in Bombay or from second-hand markets and whatnot? How much poetry do you find there? Hardly anything. You buy a book of poetry and you like it, it goes straight into your heart. And then you don't sell it. You don't get rid of it. Because suddenly you will open, and this, okay, here's like a tip, okay, from the world of poetry. You can have ordinary dreams, or you can have wild, fabulous, fascinating dreams. Who wants wild, fabulous, fascinating dreams? Yeah, very good. Okay, so now, buy yourself a book of poetry and keep it on your bedside table. Preferably a big, fat, capacious anthology. There's a great one on Indian poetry called These My Words by Eunice D'Souza and Melanie Silgado. Okay? Otherwise, if you're a white person who likes white persons, white things, then you can write, you can buy Emergency Kit by Joe Shapcott, or The Rattle Bag, Ted Hughes and Seamus Haney. Any of those, any of these above. Keep it on your bedside and do lucky dips. Every night, read a poem before you go to sleep. Immediately bizarre shit begins to transpire in your dreams. You know, when I watched this silly film called Inception, you know, you all watched it, no? Inception, man, poets have been doing that so long. When Shelley called us the unacknowledged legislators of the world, what do you think he was saying? We make the rules, boys. And understand this. When you want to say something was beautiful, you say it was pure poetry. You do not say it was, in fact, if you say if it was pure theatre, yeah, you do not say it was pure sculpture. Poetry, okay? You want to look for a really highbrow, upper middle class, Brahminical profession. You want to do like the peak thing in writing. The peak thing is poetry. Everybody else is a wannabe. No, actually, actual truth. Now, the problem with the peak thing is that mountain peaks are desolate places. Very few people are there. So there are very few people buying your book. Very few, you won't make big money. There are no advances. There are no eager publishers. But what there is, and this is the most wonderful thing in the world, is a lifelong struggle with definition. What is a poem? Why am I doing this? Koi padhta nahi hai, koi sunta nahi hai. Understand, okay. And think about this, you know. You walk into a party and say, oh, you know, I sing. And everyone says, give us a song, na? Sing, sing, sing. What do you sing? Sing, mother, sing. Can mother sing? Mother can sing. I mean, they're very excited about you singing. You say, you walk into a party and you say, I write poetry, and people say, I did a very high. Or they say things like, I used to write poetry when I was young. Meaning, I outgrew it. How come you didn't? Have you still got a diary then? With a little lock on it, perhaps. You adolescent, you. Get a real job. And so, poets tend to retreat one step further into themselves. And they tend to write arcane shit. Basically like, you don't know Greek? Oh, too bad. Because my opening lines are in Greek, said T.S. Eliot. And I won't write them in Greek in Roman script. I will put them in the original Greek. And at the end of my poem, I will use words from Sanskrit. Abaja. Let us do the intellectual exercises. Okay? Now, this is pure self-protection. This is a bruised, imagine you're a poet in the first place, okay? Which means that you are kind of like, you have one layer of skin less than everybody else. If you want to be a poet, you have to first open the vulnerable part of yourself out to everything, okay? So you want experience, you want hurt, you want pain. You don't want it, but it comes with the territory. And when it happens, there's a kind of almost disgusting joy with which you take a left step and you turn and look at the pain and say, how do I turn this into words? How do I make this into a poem? In a way, this is also the reason why lots of poets stop themselves. They jump off cliffs. One of my friends, half friends, Jeet Thail, every alternate days I like him. Is this being taped? Sorry, Jeet. Wherever you are. Godfathers. Cut that later. Anyway, he wrote a poem in which he just lists all the ways in which poets kill themselves. Jumping in front of trains, jumping off hills, jumping off bridges, doing all kinds of silly things, drinking themselves to death, etc., etc., etc. That's one part of it. The other part of it is living life with a great and terrible intensity. Always poking your nose into your own interiors. Does it sound like navel gazing? Does it sound like narcissism? Of course it is. It is narcissism. We are all narcissistic. But if your narcissism is you, consider this, I mean, if you are mildly and you are always talking about your interior life and how bad I hurt, I'm in pain. They give you lots and lots of money and no narcissist. You're Eminem about, mommy did this to you and daddy did that to you and you're rapping and rapping and rapping and you're white and they're black and they don't like you because you're white and they're black and they're rapping and you're rapping. People give you lots of money. If you write a measured, considered, elegant canzone on the inside, your interior state, they say narcissistic bastard. Don't you have anything better to do? Yeah? So the world is an unfair and unpleasant place. Remember, and this is not new. Plato did not want to have any poets in his republic. Okay? Poor Garcia Lorca went back into the revolution and got shot. When the revolution comes, the poets and the lawyers seem to be taken away. Akhmatova, every dictator takes the poets and throws them into jail. Sorry? Someone has a comment? Am I desperately valorizing poetry? Yes. Of course I'm valorizing poetry. But who else is there to do that? Everybody else here. I mean, all over stages, all over here. Go and sit down and notice how many times the word I is mentioned. And I thought, when I started writing this book, and when I won the Booker Prize, and when I read the first reviews, and when I went into this little bookshop really out there in some small town where I never expected to see my book, and when I was saying to Salman, Salman and I, man, we're like that. I all the time. We're always doing I. But why? Mainly because most of the time a writer must displace the self and say he or she or they or it or whoever. So there's a constant struggle between who you are and who you want to become. It's a life of constant schizophrenia. Imagine if you're writing dialogue between, let's imagine there is a moment where you are writing a dialogue between a 60-year-old woman and her 30-year-old son, and the son has just come out to his mum and said, I'm gay, mum, and you're straight, and you're a 50-year-old straight man, say. Now suddenly you must imagine yourself into this 60-year-old woman's position who is receiving startling news, or news that she might have heard long ago and is not startled by, but she knows she must be startled because the poor chap has finally got up the courage to say what she knew all along. And then you have to think yourself into the son's place, and then you have to write conversation that goes like that. So at each time you hit an enter on your computer, you are switching roles from here to here, here to here, here to here. This is what you're doing. Okay, it's a constant play there. So when writers talk about how lonely their lives are, how sad their lives are. They actually write. They are lonely, horrid, sad lives. So then you say, give yourself a break, stop writing. Lonely, horrible and sad, don't write. The only answer to that I have figured out is that I am lonelier and sadder and my life is more horrible when I am not writing than when I am writing. Which is actually a way of saying I'm happiest when I'm writing. So that's what I do. They told me, please make time for audience interaction, and that nasty woman over there in the corner started it long ago, so no, don't be silly. I just make you feel bad because you're in the sun and I'm in the cold. And I'm from Bombay and I don't have any warm clothes in the world. So this Jaipur thing is like beyond belief. I just wear 6 t-shirts inside. And I wash my own clothes, so then I have to wash all those t-shirts when I go back. I keep thinking the outside t-shirt will be okay, but it's also smelly. Say, do you have any questions? Whatever, however stupid, however, because as I told you, there are no categories. There's no good poem, there's no bad poem. There's only a poem that floats out onto the river. And there's this great image, and I don't even know if Li Pai did it or not, because who can ask the Chinese anything? Even America can't ask the Chinese anything. So, and imagine going to a Chinese person and saying, listen, your poet Li Pai said that he used to write poems on date palms and float them down the river, and the next reader would read them and save the poem, and then eventually all the readers downriver from Li Pai saved all these date palms. His collection came together. It's a fabulous story, and the only closest story that I can think of is Tukaram's Bij Ki Wahi. Tukaram is a low caste man in India, but he is madly in love with God. And so he starts writing poems to God. And then the Brahmins of the village tell him, how can you write poems to God? You're a low caste person. God is not listening to you. What nonsense is this? Take those poems and throw them into the river. And since Tukaram is a good man and obedient to his caste superiors, he makes a pile of all his poems, ties them up, and heartbroken, he throws them in the river. And 2 days later, they rise up on the surface of the river and they are returned to him. Miracle. Poetry miracle. Okay? Same like Li Pai. I am writing poems because Emperor's really mad at me, thrown me out of court. I'm sitting in some exile. He's warned me not to write poetry or I will be killed, so I can't keep the evidence, but I still have to write poetry. So I'm writing the poetry and I'm sailing these things off down the river, and someone's picking them up somewhere and making a book out of them, an autochthonous book, one might even say, if one were academic and had tenure at an American university, but one does not, so why bother? Anyway, so there off goes that book of poems, and this is saved. Now, what actually has happened here? What has happened here is an example of postmodernism. It ain't a poem until there's a reader. So poetry is not made by poets. Poetry is made when a poem made by a poet goes out into the world, is received by somebody who thinks, Mother of flame in Jesus, he's saying what I think. Or holy incendiary turpentine, I cannot bear what this person is saying, and I think he's talking a load of pile of nonsense, and therefore I will write another poem. And the job of the poem, the function of the poem may actually be to produce another poem, to start poems happening. So that if you read a poem in the night, you might get up in the morning with a poem, and then that poem's done its work. Kedarnath Singh has this wonderful Hindi poem where he talks about how Kedarnath Singh right now is my current muse. One of the fabulous things about Hindi poetry is Rajkamal. Rajkamal puts out every Hindi poet of note and keeps them out. Meaning, sure, feel free. I'm running out of things to say. However difficult this may sound.
How does it happen that many poets suffer a lot during their lifetime and die in penury? And after they die, then people are like, oh, he was a great poet. People write PhDs and doctorates and all that. I'm also a small Hindi poet.
Don't say small. Koi small, bada nahi, koi chota nahi. You are a poet. Bas, rejoice.
That's very good. Thank you. That's very positive. Now I say, in Hindi, Mukti Bodh.
Gajanan.
Mukti Bodh, Gajanan Mukti Bodh, a great poet. But you know how did he suffer when he was ill? He didn't have money even for treatment. And also Dushyant Kumar, he wrote great ghazals. Now people realize. Yesterday, even Namita Gokhale quoted his two couplets of ghazal. So how does it happen that during their lifetime, these people suffer and die in penury, no money even to cure themselves, and then people suddenly realize that he was a great poet and they are taught in MA classes and all that.
How does it happen?
Can you reply it?
Okay, there are two ways. One is the spiritual metaphysical answer and one is the ordinary answer. Which you want? Ordinary? Okay, both. The spiritual metaphysical one is, I think everyone, when you're a little baby Atma, a little soul floating about, someone comes up to you and says, what kind of life do you want? Do you want like nice and settled life, you know, like Switzerland? Or do you want unsettled, odd, mysterious, challenging life like Bombay stroke, Mumbai stroke, India stroke like that? And without thinking about, some people are sensible, some Atmas are sensible and say, okay, settled. Settled is nice. I'll take settled. And they go and they become bank employees and they get provident fund and they get pension and they worry about increment and bonus and you know, you hear them in five-star hotels saying, when you're passing through, saying, you know, man, I don't know how I can survive. My bonus was only 700,000 US this year. You know, what's that? I mean, really, I'm underpaid. And you think, I'll just hit you with this vase or something. Because that's my money in your bank. And when I go for a loan, you never have money. But you can give bonuses. Okay, so there's that kind of person. And the other person who innocently says, no, I'd like an interesting life. They become creative people. And then the world says, interesting, na? Yeah. What is interesting? To get up in the morning and think, oh, there's so much money in the bank. What shall I spend it on? Or is it more interesting to get up in the morning and say, oh God, I'm really hungry. And I could write a poem about hunger, or I could go out and do some work. But I think I'll write a poem about hunger and then I'll go and do some work. So let me just finish this. Oh, there isn't any ink. But my son is going to school and how much can he write in school? So I'll take his pen. And I'll write a poem and yeah, okay, so the first line should be, I think the first line should not have hunger in it. Or maybe the whole poem shouldn't have hunger in it. That'll be cool. They have to guess it's about hunger. But suppose I trapped them into thinking it was about sex and revealed it as being hunger in the last line. Shite. That's an anthology poem. Now, it's 11 o'clock. And this is the time at which perhaps you should go out and get a job or find a living. But this is only the idea. Now, the words, those dirty, elusive, horrid, mongrel things that are always slipping away from you have to be put down and committed to paper. This is horrible moment because if you put down the first word of any idea committed to paper limits the next word. I limits the next word to a verb. The limits the next verb to a noun or an adjective and then a noun. But every word that you put down narrows your possibilities and forces you to do its commands, and suddenly you're a robot. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah? I was going to fall on you. I thought I'd frighten you. So I'm saying, but this is now 3 o'clock. And now it's too late to go anyway. And your sons come home and say, Daddy, you took my pen again. I told you, don't touch my pen. And you think, I'm in the middle of writing literary history. And this scumbag wants me to attend to his crying. And you say, Arey, Aji, sunte ho? Tera beta ko dekh. Which is like, hey, wife, take your son from here. What did I do? I didn't have the son. Anyway. So the great Robert Frost came down from his study one day and a friend was there. And Robert Frost was a New England man, which meant he took writing as a job. He arrived at his desk at the same time every day and he wrote till lunchtime. Then he came down and had a frugal New England lunch. Then he went up and wrote again. And then at 6 o'clock he put down his pen and came downstairs. Ha! He sounds frightening. It's almost as frightening as imagining John Keats like bleeding and coughing and writing poems and taking laudanum and rewriting poems and crying and dying because there was a bad review. It's almost as terrifying as that. Like one side there's this man, one side there's that man. But someone is supposed to have asked Robert Frost once, how did the writing go? And he said, very well, 2 lines. That's output. In a market-driven economy, 2 lines? You jest. Yeah? So, now, if you, okay, someone, because, I went to Amsterdam once, again, literary festival type thing, and then I helicoptered into the literary festival. I came, and I went out again and saw the city. Then I came back, I went out again, saw the city, out and saw the city. I didn't go to anybody else. I'll come to you in a moment. Yeah, but I've got your number. I know that you're asking. I'm saying, I did this in Amsterdam, and I went to Vincent, to that museum on Van Gogh, as they tell me you should be, Van Gogh, Van Gogh, as they say you should be pronounced. And I fell in love. I fell in love so much that I came home and I just talked endlessly about Vincent to anyone who would listen. So one of my rich banker type friends gave me 3 volumes of his letters to Theo. Okay? And I thought, here it is. Here's my buddy, my Humsafar. He's talking. And page after page is, I don't have any money, send some money. Why are you not selling paintings? Kya ho raha hai? I'm so poor. I don't have rent. I don't have money for bread. Arey, there is no yellow. How can I paint without yellow? You told me you're sending yellow. I know yellow is expensive. Okay, send blue. Send red. It's like page after page after page. Ghalib wrote poems about his pension. Arey, mere ko pension nahi mil raha hai. This, if you go around Shivaji Park in where I live in the city where pensioners come and totter about, they also are saying, mera pension, mera Majnu, mera Heer, mera Ranjha, mera pension de Baba. So, this is the life that you want to live. You want to live in a certain realm, and you have to live in this world. And this world is making like really serious, imperious demands on you. I mean, your kid is coming over and saying, Baba, Baba. Whole school is going to Nepal for a trip, only 25,000. And you think 25,000? Are you out of your mind? I can live on 25,000 for 10 months. So, and this is a great line, no? 7 cities claimed Homer dead, through which the living Homer begged his bread. Wah, wah, wah. Yeah? So I'm saying, we live with this and we don't mind. The rewards are many. You're a poet, sir, you know. When you've done the poem, when there's that feeling like, bas! Then you, like, at that moment, it's temporary. It's like a little temporary moment when you feel, oh, woo, it's a poem. Okay, then you read it to a friend who says, yeah. And if he's a poet, very dangerous to read poets' poems. मैंने ऐसे ही लिखा था 10 साल पहले. So now, I wrote this 10 years ago. Can I read it to you? So poets don't like poets. A pink Lacoste t-shirt with little frill of hair in the front. Very nice hair, I'm sorry to say. I mean, I didn't mean to sound dismissive about your hair. It's just that's how I recognize you.
My question was, what got you interested into poetry rather than any other style of writing?
No. See, when I put on a kurta, then I'm a poet. When I take off my kurta, then I'm anyone else. No, that's not true. This is like externals. Like, because in the morning when you're thinking about, like, you're going to Jaipur Literary Festival and, you should, you're going to talk about poetry. You have no idea what you're going to say. You're going to invent it on the spot. Then you should at least look like a poet. Then they might be fooled into thinking, usko kuch malum hai, kuch samajh hai. Then you put on the kurta and half your job is done. Kurta mein pehna, and if I had a jhola bhi diya. Now, no, Kolhapuris, then thoda sa frown. Yeah, And I'm done. Done and dusted. So no, okay, when am I a poet? It's a full-time occupation. But actually I love words. So words present themselves in a variety of guises, right? So one day they arrive and they're telling you some kind of story. I've often started a poem that turned out to be a short story. I've often started a short story that starts collapsing into itself, pulling, all the words keep falling out of it, and suddenly there's a form, and there's a shape, and there's a music, and there's a rhythm, and suddenly there's something darker and deeper and more interior, and then I smell that it is a poem, and there's an itch under the skin, and you have to scrape underneath the skin and pull out one nerve, and with that nerve you start writing the poem. It's like, yeah! Fabulous moment, okay? So, I write almost everything that is, I have written speeches for young women to say on stage at beauty contests. You want those lines? So, now you have to imagine me as a young woman introducing a beauty contest. So, I have to walk on stage. Which means, you have to do that one. And then you say, welcome to Beautopia, where the babes in the running are simply stunning, where the prizes are to vie for and the title is to die for. Welcome to Beautopia. But they give you money for this. You write a good poem, they don't give you money. So that's the way of the world. Kya kare? So this I do from time to time. And I do it from a well of irony and stupidity and like, you think when they read this, they will say, oh, how can we write like this? I can't say this rubbish on stage. But the girl is looking and saying, oh, that's really cool. Damn nice lines, yeah. And then someone else in the organizer says, yes, but he is a poet. I could have told. And you think, babe, no, you could not have told. Not from those lines. But those are actually, see, when you think interesting, this is what happens. Like every day there's something else happening, something new. You walked in for a poetry thing, did you think you'd be laughing? No. You thought you'd be deeply engrossed and, like deepened and made a... Yeah, go read a poem for that! That's what poetry is for. Live people are for other things. I say, there's one here. Bol. You need the mic so that you will be captured for posterity.
Sir, this side, to your left.
To my left, Okay, yeah.
I want to ask you about, I know that you're saying that poets have miserable lives and stuff, but there are poets like Vikram Seth, who maybe like they mix it up with, novels as well, but they are living happy lives and, they don't wear kurtas and cholas. No, they're wearing suits and proper suits.
I'll tell him he's living a happy life.
People are buying
you concealed it from me.
And, I buy his books, so...
How can he not be happy then? No, sorry. I really don't want to. I think what the question is, a young woman in the cerise t-shirt. I like when talking to women, you must always use odd names for colors. You must never use pink. Because women say pink. I'm not wearing pink. I'm wearing cerise. Huh? Yeah, it is. Cerise comes from cherries. I've never seen a cherry that color, but who knows? Okay, I don't want to suggest in a romantic fashion that poets' lives are miserable and therefore everyone is miserable and they all slit their wrists and die. Okay? As I said, Robert Frost lived a perfectly civil life. Wallace Stevens went and worked in an insurance company every day and he rose to be vice president. Though in America, I think everyone is vice president. Like you get into a lift and you say, hello, lift man, and they say, I'm the vice president of the Liftman's Association. And you say, good on you, mate. Everyone's vice president. So, despite what I'm saying fundamentally is that the act of production, inspiration, that whole bunch of things, which is supposed to be all very good, that's kind of lonely work. And it can make you sad and unhappy. I was telling Ravi, my friend, I'm translating Swadesh Deepak. And by mistake, I left the book that I'm translating from at home. Okay? And suddenly there's air inside. Suddenly my interior is kind of filled with air and light and space. And I didn't even know there was no air and light and space because I was translating this deep, dark book. Okay? And he'd taken away some of, and it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. Unhappiness is a bad thing and not a bad thing also. Like imagine if you're an engineer and someone breaks your heart. What do? Build a bridge. But if you're Yeats, when you are old and grey and full of sleep and nodding by the fire, take down this book and think. You had a chance to be with Yeats, Maud gone, and now it's all gone.
So
Anyone, sorry. So.
when you're writing a poem,
Call me Jerry. Try it. Say Jerry. Be democratic, non-hierarchical. Just because I'm in a kurta and up on the stage doesn't mean you have to call me sir.
so when you're writing a poem,
I'm being paid. What?
so when you write a poem, so how do you go about it? Do you like let your thoughts flow through, or you decide that I'm going to write about this today and then think about it, like put words, or just go freely?
Honest or dishonest answer? Honest? Oh, both. What fun. Okay, the dishonest answer is that there is... Actually, I don't know how to be dishonest about this also, so I'll just stick with honest. Honest is, there are often times when you just want to write a poem. You're aching to write a poem. You haven't written a poem for a long time. It's just like... so you take a pen and you take a paper, then you try and fetishize it, like a nice pen with thick ink flowing and good paper and all. And then you start and you write, duh. And you say, duh, do your work, duh, bring something with it, duh. You have no reason to exist, duh, unless there is another thing, duh. Bring that thing. Sometimes it comes. Sometimes it doesn't come. I have never written a poem either on demand, like, I believe the poet laureate has to write a nice poem for Mrs. Windsor. I don't know if I'd be able to write a poem on Mrs. Windsor. The Queen of England is Mrs. Windsor, no? I'm a democratic, non-hierarchical person. I don't call queens queens and all. She just got born there. She's Mrs. Windsor. To me. Okay, now, I don't write poems on demand, but there is no demand. So I'm liberated. I don't write poems on ideas because I often find that a good idea to be expressed needs an essay. It doesn't need a poem. Poems need suggestions, hesitations, incompletenesses, halfway feelings, all that sort of thing, but then very, very hard, close, clear words to express them. So I start with a word, generally, and out of that word, like a box, other things tumble, and that's how the poem happens. Yeah. I'm sorry I can't give you a better answer than that. It's like, sounds quite stupid. Yes. Hello, shut up. Answer my question.
Sorry. Sorry.
Naughty woman. Say.
Jerry,
that side also.
Jerry.
May the lady ask first, it's alright.
Yes, yeah.
Jerry, I teach English at Lady Shri Ram.
Huh?
I teach English at Lady Shri Ram.
Other people say Jai Shri Ram, I say Jai Lady Shri Ram.
And over the last 20 years, I penned 6 stories. It was very difficult to find a publisher, a local publisher published it. And I'm fortunate that because it was fiction, it sold 700 copies in the last 6 months, basically on Amazon.
6 months?
Amazon.
You're Harold Robbins.
No. I must say, I attended a little upcoming writers' conference at Diggy in December, and Sudeep Sen was there, poet, who was sweet enough to mention my book in his list of his best books, which he read last year.
You saw how many there were?
There were
My book was on it also, but he obviously read 10 books a day or something.
Yeah, but sweet of him.
Sweet of him. We have to admit, yeah.
So maybe that's why it's sold. But this is the question I wanted to ask you, is because I was told that for drama, essays, poetry, and short stories, there's no publisher. You said a poem reads a reader. I think it needs patronage and a publisher. And I think poetry is the worst of all these.
You've
But
made a will?
translation. So how
Have you made a will?
No, but how does...
Make a will, leave your money to a poetry publishing organization.
No, how do you publish
Everybody
those who are
says-
well known? It's okay.
Who is well known?
All of
Name
you.
5 poets
All
who
of
are
you.
well known.
All of you. But the point is...
Name 5 poets who are
those
well known in Hindi. Wait,
upcoming,
1 minute.
Those who are upcoming, how do they
In
publish?
Hindi.
How do they publish?
They don't publish. Most manuscripts are left unpublished.
So that's not very good for poetry.
Not at all. Now what will you do?
But
What will
something
you do?
should be done.
No. This is the problem with poetry. It is always a question of something should be done. someone should do it. Who is that something and someone?
I'm not a publisher.
No, but you leave your money to no, I'm serious. In my will, I have left money to poetry publishing. I've set up a fund and I put little money in it, and I don't have much money. By the time I die, that money will be, he's giving like this much money, so we can publish one page with this much money, and the whole thing will go toos. But I'm saying, if you care about poetry, fund it. I have set up this, like for instance, with Speaking Tiger, for instance, I take them a book of poems and I take them a sponsor and I say, okay, I've got both of these two here. Will you publish a book of poetry? And the book of poetry comes out. But I do the work. Why do we expect someone else to do the work? You think poetry is important? Hey, do the work for poetry, man. Come out and do it. What is this patronage thing? Who will you take money from? Ijjat se. Ambani.
That's true. That's true.
Ambani paisa dega to poetry likhegi. Heard? Yeah, so, I mean, we've got to be, see, the wonderful thing is eventually, in India, poets have published themselves all the time. You name the biggest and the best poets, including Ghalib Sahab, who sent money and said, publish my poems. Nissim Ezekiel, Nissim Ezekiel, Adil Jasawala, Agiv Patel, all with Writers' Workshop published their own poetry. There was a great clearinghouse cooperative in the 1970s. They got together, pooled their own money, put out their poems in lovely books that are still available. I mean, not available today because they're now priceless copies, etc., etc. I'm doing an essay on them. I mean, we have done, poets have to, see, we'd love not to have our hands dirty. We'd love someone to come and say, when's your next book of poetry due? Can I have it? It would be lovely. That happens to me now. My publisher is very sweet, Ravi Singh. He's asked me for a book of poems. It's rare. And why is it rare? I'll tell you why it's rare. And it's a simple thing. It's not because publishers are nasty people. Okay? It's because you are nasty people. When did you last buy a book of poetry? Then why is poetry going to be published? You're all sitting here for natak, na? Main thoda nachega, gaega, bolega, and then you will go home and not buy poetry. So what? I'm fine with that. Everyone's got to have choices. A bookshop is a series of choices you choose. It's very rare for people to go into a bookshop and say, hey, where's the poetry section? In India, there's no poetry section. If there is a poetry section, then it is Gulzar Sahab. I was like, okay, no problems, no issues. No issues with you not buying poetry. I got it, I understand it. You have the right over your own purse. You can look on the internet and get lots of poetry when you want. You can say it's not on the net. You can. Or you can have shelves and shelves of poetry like I do. And I love them. I open my poetry cupboard and a book falls out and hits me on the head and often starts a poem. Hey, that's the good thing. Yeah, anyone with a question?
So, over here.
Over there. Yeah, he's got the mic. Yeah, go.
So, whenever I write a poem and I think it's a nice poem, I read it out to my friends and like, okay, it's all right.
Yeah.
But then if by chance some of my friends would happen to read some of my poems, which I wouldn't want them to read, I would say.
The private poems?
No. मैं तो ये बस ऐਵੇਂ ही लिखी. So they would praise that. So it often leaves me in a dilemma. Should I read what people want me to write, or should I write what I feel like writing?
I think you should write what comes. And if something, okay, audience reaction is a bitch. It is not trustworthy at all. How many people are here and how many people will be in front of my book signing table? Just gin. Count the numbers. So what is the point? At the end of the day, first, who are your friends? Are they people who read poetry other than yours? Do they have a good judgment of poetry? Do they like poetry? Do they understand poetry? If they do, then you might want to trust them. If they often when you're sitting around having a cup of coffee, someone says, I've just read a new poem, can I share it with you guys? And you're reading a poem that is someone else's, not yours. Trust those people. If they buy a book of poetry every month, if you all share poetry among yourselves, trust them. But if they are just friends who listen to your poem because you're a friend, don't trust them. Be happy that you have friends who listen to you. That's a good thing. And a wonderful, supportive bunch of friends you have. And I'm happy to know it. But you don't have to trust their value judgments on your poetry. Those have to be inside you. They have to be yours. You have to decide. Yeah? They'll clap for the oddest things. I never know. Huh. Tell. Give him the mic, na? He has to ask the question so everyone can hear, then I can answer. Otherwise, I sound like a fool. Say.
So, what's your view on editing and rewriting poetry that you've written before, in contrast to like Ginsberg's rule of first thought, best thought?
Ginsberg was an idiot.
Really?
He wrote about 10 good poems. That's my considered opinion. No, I love Ginsberg. Like at the times when I was reading the last poems about the AIDS time and whatnot, I was thinking what risks he takes so casually, really casually. But for me, in my own humble way, I have never written a poem that could not be improved by editing. Okay? My poems, and I don't think I have any static poems. So I have one book, Asylum and Other Poems was my first book of poems. I have a copy of that which is constantly being annotated. Constantly I'm thinking this is not the word I wanted here. So that's not a fixed poem either. So I'm constantly changing them because I'm constantly changing. So my relationship to those words is changing. My relationship to those lines is changing. This is what I want to say, but now in a different way. That word should have been here. Oh gosh. Then I often discover that the pronunciation of the word I imagined is not the real pronunciation. Then I have to change the line again. Okay, language keeps slipping away from you madly as you're pursuing it. So the poem changes and everything changes, and I can't imagine. Actually, I believe the work of a writer is rewriting. It's not writing. Writing anyone can do. All of you will write a letter this evening. You become a writer. You will write a grocery list. You'll become a writer. You've written an email, you're writing. The writer, the real writer is the person who rewrites. That's not to say Ginsberg is not a writer. Ginsberg is a highly talented, uniquely gifted person who could say that, but had no business giving it out as a law. Other people are not so fortunate, and to imagine that your first flush of inspiration is the best thing in the world is exactly the way your mummy looks at you and thinks you are the best beta in the world. That's not the truth. It may be, you might be the best beta. I don't know, but I'm saying it's likely not to be the truth. Yeah. Hi.
I'm Devendra Pai from Mumbai.
Hi, Devendra.
Hi.
What are you doing here? Yeah, man, you got warm clothes.
Yeah, I had friends in Jaipur who asked me to get warm clothes.
That is it.
The question is, I'm a student of political science, and you mentioned about Plato and the Republic. So I wanted to know from you, why did Plato ban poets in the Republic?
Okay, 1 minute. Let me just get clear. Plato did the word poet is a redacted translation. Actually, by poets he meant playwrights, poets, anyone telling a story.
Why?
All creative people. Because if the whole of your life is about confronting reality, then why would you want to confront an illusion of reality? So therefore, all poets and all storytellers were liars, and all liars were to be banned from the Republic. It's quite a logical syllogism. It is flawed on the basis of that confrontation with reality. Reality is never as dense or as terrifying or as real as when it is turned into artifice, and that artifice has behind it a hugely true intent, and each person then confronts in art the horror of their own existence, the reality of their own existence. So I believe actually reality is much more real when it is artificial. And I'm a postmodernist, and I should have a chair in Sorbonne or something like that. But they stupid people in France, they won't even give me a visa sometimes if I don't show like 3 years of. This is my my crime writer friend.
Hi. Excuse me.
Give him the. Yeah. We are now, like, obviously the philosophers have arrived.
Yeah.
So Heidegger's
so what he
writing
did is,
experiments.
so what he did was he gave his students poetry without the name of the poet mentioned, right? And so let's say the big wigs didn't get a good reaction, while the other ones, the subalterns or what you want, right? Those people get good reaction. So a lot of times, don't you think reading, not just poetry but anything or art, isn't it a lot about name dropping or recognizing a name and then yeah, I mean, I would read an Agatha Christie. I would perhaps not read no offense, Surendra Mohan Pathak. Like, I mean, because we know them from our crime writing festival hijinks, right? So I'm just saying it's about taking risks as much in writing as much as in reading. The process of reading, So doesn't
Okay.
that affect the creative process itself?
200,000%. Totally, 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 totally true. But we are all human. Heidegger was not. I think Heidegger was like a image created by several German scientists, like in an early version of virtual reality. And then see, humanity is always going to be flawed. Many of our flaws are about the ego. Many of our flaws are about how we would like to be perceived. So, when you're traveling on a train, you look at your books and you think, I'm not taking Playboy's party jokes. Though I might read that all the time at home, I'm going to take Heidegger. And the cool chick on the next bench might think, oh God, he's reading Heidegger. He must be smart. So all our intentions are flawed. We are human. But if words and poetry really matter to you, you will push past that. I lived through a huge time when Kamala Das was seen as a confessional poet. She only wrote about her interior life, and there were bigger and better things. It never stopped me from loving Kamala Das. Really loving her. And some fond old spider, you poke your finger into my dreaming eye. Hariva. It's like, if you think about what a man does to a woman, how lovely is that line? Very controversial. She was always talking about sexuality. What is controversial talking about sex? We are doing it all the time. Look at how many children we produce. But when we talk about it, it becomes controversy. Yeah.
Hi.
One over there and then.
Yeah, I kind of got lost somewhere in between the talk. At the beginning of the talk, you were talking about
This is the voice of reason.
Definition and what is a poem, and right now, I don't know, we've gone into publishing and I don't know, poets live miserable lives and oh, so sad. And could you help me out?
What do you want to know? Anything.
We were talking about definition.
I was trying to say, when you say bad poem and good poem, it is as difficult as saying man and woman. There are obviously some things that you recognize. If a Basavanna, when they see breasts and long hair coming, they say it is a woman. When they see big muscles, they say it is a man. But what of the spirit, O Lord of the white jasmine, floating in, is it male or female? We don't know. We know what we know in an experiential way. Justice Learned Hand is an American judge, lovely name, no? Learned Hand. Yeah, I'd like to have a name like that. He said, I know pornography when I see it. For instance, I know a good poem when I see it. But that is because I know. I'm trying to point out that we need to decanonize what Jishnu, what's your name? Vishnu, no? What Vishnu was asking about how when you take out the name of a poem, of a poet, suddenly all the canonical guys are treated much worse than all the non-canonical guys. So I'm trying to point out that actually what happens when you confront a poem is you. Your individual singularity confronts a poem. Then whether it becomes part of you and your poetry world and your dreamscape and your life chances and your choices is you, your decision. That was the thrust of the talk, in case you needed it reduced into a two-liner. Thank you.
So,
Yeah,
so,
one
so,
minute,
so,
yeah.
so, this is the last. This is the last question. I just want to
Is
ask
it?
you one thing. Yeah, they just told me. So,
I'm
apart
here.
from you've given all the facts, like poets have a miserable life or
No,
sad
no, it's not a
life or-
fact, it's an opinion.
No, just what? It's the truth that poets don't get published or whatever. So, what exactly, in our opinion, should we do? Like, what do poets do who don't have the funds to, give to leave a will to the publishing houses or whatever? What do we do?
I'll tell you what we do. First of all, what poets have always done is we are a very hardy, self-reliant breed. Okay? You will notice that all the big publishers have anthologies. They will put out the anthology after the poems have been printed in a book, and from that they will pinch out things and produce an anthology. But they won't support the books themselves. But we do it because we want to. And what should we do? We will continue to do this. If tomorrow suddenly things change, they will change. If they will not, look at this. Poetry has not ever had support. Not ever. Poets have never been rich. They've always been impoverished. Even except perhaps for Byron, who was paid a gold sovereign for every canto or something like that. Some story like that. Most people have lived poor lives, but it has not stopped another generation of people saying, I want to do this stuff. I want to write poetry. So there is something basically, fundamentally human about wanting to write poetry, and that is what will keep poetry going long after the money has been devalued and the shares are worthless. Yeah, last.
Here, so I really wanted to ask you about being a poet. How much is appreciation important for you? Appreciation of your poetic pieces, appreciation of what you've written, people acknowledging your work.
Good.
How much is that important for you? And how much should it be important for any writer, any poet?
It is oxygen. It is totally, totally oxygen. It should not be. It cannot be. It must not be. You must only rely on your interior compass of a poem, your knowledge of the poem. The internal guru is the only guru you need to acknowledge in the writing of a poem. But when you read a poem and people applaud or they say, wah, wah, and they look real, and you know, I read a poem and there was a man crying and I thought, I can live on this for 6 months. When I'm feeling bad, I'll think about that man crying. Maybe he was just crying because but I decided he was crying because he was deeply moved, so I can live on it for 6 months. But it's false coin. It's really false coin. Actually, you have to know whether, okay, say for instance, a friend of mine who is a poet and who writes poetry looks up from a poem and says, wow, what a poem. That's what I'm looking for. Because then that's an informed opinion and a competitor opinion. He or she has been forced to say it's a good poem. Okay. But if a person has just heard a poem and, you know, thinks, and very often people think like, you know, they should say wah, because it's polite, you know. Or a poem like, wah, wah, wah. And they don't mean it, then what is the point of taking those vahs home or believing in them? What is the point? I don't know. So it's sad, but it shouldn't be oxygen, but it is. It is lifeblood. Someone else? Yeah. No, you asked a question already.
Will you please recite a poem to us?
Arey, sure, happy to. I'm thinking, okay, I will do the one that has stayed with me because it is such a beautiful poem. And by me, no, chi. Of myself? Imagine your mummy is being asked, choose between your children, which one is your favorite, and take only that child abroad. Don't take anyone else. ऐसे नहीं करते? Chi? Okay, so I'm going to do a poem by Lewis Carroll just because I love Lewis Carroll. And I like this poem and it gives me a chance to do all kinds of rubbish things. Okay, here we go. Jabberwocky. See, if I had read I'd said a poem of mine, if I had said out of the asylum, you'd have said, "'Twas brillig." Hey, Mike, kidhar hai re? "'Twas brillig and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe." Achha, not working. Sorry. Can you hear me? Yeah. "'Twas brillig and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves and mome rats outgrabe. Beware the jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the jub bird and shun the frumious bandersnatch. He took his vorpal blade in hand, long time his manxome foe he sought. Then rested he by the tum-tum tree and stood a while in thought." I mean, you're on a hunt, but if you can stand a while in thought, you're like really a dude. I mean, the jabberwock's out there, but he's thinking. And while in uffish thought he stood, the jabberwock with eyes of flame came whiffling through the tulgey wood and burbled as it came. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through, his vorpal blade went snicker-snack. He cut it dead and took his head and went galumphing back. "Hast thou slain the jabberwock, my son? Come to my arms, my beamish boy. O frabjous day, kalukale," he chortled in his joy. "'Twas brillig and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves and mome rats outgrabe." And now, just last poem, 2 seconds ka poem, which is one of my favorites. Fire and Ice by Robert Frost. Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if the world should perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction, ice is great and will suffice. Thank you very much. Buy a poem.
A big thank you to Jerry Pinto for an amazing session presented by Amity University, and a big thank you to all of you here. The author would be available for book signing at the book signing area behind the venue console, and the books are available at the festival bookstore. We'll be back here at Samvad for the session Room on the Roof, Ruskin Bond in conversation with Himali Sodhi and Udayan Mitra at 2:30 at Samvad. Thank you so much.